Call the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:30 p.m. Ms. Fromm, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Allens?
Here.
Ms. McCall? Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Ms. Haley?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, before we go any further, we have Connor Childers. He works behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast. I'd like to thank you, Connor. One more after this, also on Comcast Channel 20. I would like to welcome Superintendent Student Advisory Council Representative Jessica Perez Furman. You're here from Auburn High School. Thank you. A reminder to everybody to hold your questions until after the presentations, and we'll start with the meeting minutes from January 3rd, which was our last Committee of the Whole. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at those, but are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, is there consensus to approve? Thumb. We got it. Thank you. Ms. Pearson, I'm going to give you the floor to lead the Internal-External Stakeholders Committee portion of the meeting.
Thank you, Mrs. McCulloch. We will begin our slide deck by looking at the stakeholders' 12-month agenda. We have several important topics on the agenda this evening. Our first presentation will be from Maureen Kirschman, manager of our Family and Community Engagement Department. Ms. Kirschman will give us an update on our ARP ESSER partners. Ms. Kirschman, the floor is yours.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm excited to be here to talk about this. So the very first place I'd like to start is on a quick recap about what the call to action is. So just over a year ago, we put out a community call to action to our organizations to submit proposals to provide extended time learning opportunities for our students in response to COVID-19. We received feedback from some of our smaller organizations that they were concerned about our reimbursement rate at a net 45 and that it was very difficult for them to do business with us. So we worked closely with our finance team, and the finance department was able to create a process to allow these smaller organizations a weekly reimbursement for the smaller organizations, and now the Family and Community Engagement team does special check requests weekly to make sure that we're providing opportunities for small not-for-profits to do business with RPS. We currently have 25 call to action agreements with various organizations, and we are continuing to build partnerships. So what do these programs look like? The next few slides will break down when students are able to participate in programs, starting with our mentor programs. Some of the organizations offer programming at multiple times, such as during lunch hour, after school, and on the weekends, which is why the pie graph doesn't neatly add up to the same number of organizations on the side. The extended time in this chart refers to organizations that utilize student non-instructional time to mentor kids, typically during lunch hours. we are able to offer now fine arts opportunities throughout the entire school year, including on Saturdays. And we have many extended time opportunities, which these programs are typically what we think of with our traditional community center model, doing after-school programming, summer camps, and weekend programs. So what is our reach with these programs? How many kids have we actually worked with? We are really excited to learn that we have a total of 2,131 seats that have been filled with our organizations, with many students attending more than one program. This picture is of one of the kids that's at Washington Park Community Center as part of the Rockford Area Arts Council Arts Place program from last summer. This graph shows a breakdown of our students served, looking at our unique students, which is 947. The graph also shows that we are reaching students at every single RPS school, including early childhood. And one of the trends that we noticed when we were looking at where students were duplicating programs, or students attending more than one programs, was with they were engaged with mentor programs, they were more likely to be engaged with an after-school or extended time program. Spending. So in January, the Finance Department did a very robust presentation on ARP-ESSER with our call to action work. Of that, we have $4.7 million amount that's been awarded out to organization and just over $400,000 that's been paid. Successes and barriers. This is always the fun part, is to celebrate what's going really, really well with our organizations. Kendall Sherman Foundation reported back that 24 of their 68 participants increased their grades by 10% in 1 month. At Arts Place, as we saw in the picture earlier, students are so excited to have a public place to display their art and to show off their hard work that they're doing during their arts programming. The Grace United Garden Project that's running over at the Grove, students love that they can share the produce that they're growing with their community and with their neighbors. And Antoine Harris has shared that the students, some of the kids he's working with, have opened up about their personal struggles with addiction and connected them back with help. The theme barriers that we've seen from our organizations are staffing shortages and turnover, and the marketing of programs. Staffing shortage is something that we're very familiar with as our organizations across the country. For marketing programs, we're trying our best to work with organizations to offer Peach Jar for free, to put the flyers out for them. We have a Live, Learn, Play page on the district site where people are able to see all of the program opportunities, and that is updated regularly. We're promoting their programs on the Vibe and encouraging organizations to write blogs about what they're doing. We're pushing out on social media as organizations are requesting, and we're helping make those connections with targeted schools with organizations so they can meet with very specific individuals to help get families enrolled in their programs. So looking ahead, there is a financial audit that's currently taking place, and we are actively doing site visits going into these organizations to see what's happening during the programming times. We're looking at our student attendance rates. For our partner programs, and we're continuing to promote programs so we can connect more students with opportunities, especially looking into this summer so we can really target those kids that we want to make sure are engaged in extended learning opportunities, to partner them with a program that's close to their home or close to wherever their care is during the summer. Any questions before I introduce our guests? Yes.
I have a couple. First of all, what makes a program small so that they're paid without having to go through the whole process with the form and wait?
It's the really small not-for-profits that don't have a large operating budget. I would have to
cut off, or is this just a subjective measure on which ones do and which ones don't?
It's on a case-by-case basis with those conversations within the organizations.
So out of 25, how many are you paying? It's just that we've paid out so little.
Sure. I would have to look into that for you without giving a very specific number. The majority of the organizations, though, we're doing weekly check requests for.
The majority of the 25.
Majority of them we are. The larger organizations are a net 45, so some of their reimbursement is, like Boys and Girls Club, for example, with being a very large organization, they will submit reimbursement for like 2 months at a time, and they're able to sustain that, whereas really small not-for-profits are not.
No, I'm glad we're doing it. It's just looking at do we have a process to decide who gets that or not? Secondly, I didn't hear a lot about how you're evaluating the programs other than you were looking at attendance when you were there. I think as a board member, when the COVID money runs out and we have to decide which programs are really of benefit and making a difference in our students' lives, we need to have a sound evaluation system. So what kind of evaluation are you doing? Or will you be doing? What do you have in place? What process?
Sure. So about every 3 months, organizations are required to submit an update on how they're meeting the outcomes that they've identified in their proposal. We've asked them to, put that in their document, and they submit that back to us, and then we review that internally. During our site visits, when we go out to visit the organizations, we also look at how many kids are here, how many were you intended to serve, and what are you doing that we can see to meet these objectives that you've outlined, and what are the successes that you're seeing. So when we look at an organization like Kendall Sherman Foundation that is, seeing success and growth with students through the work that they're doing, we've, begun having conversations with them of, how do we expand this into other schools if it's working well? Or with Antoine, with the Antoine Harris group, we started a contract. It worked really well. We saw great results from that, and so we've expanded that into other schools.
So back to my question, do we have a form, an evaluation, so that we're consistent across all 25 that we're with right now, that we're gathering the same information? You said attendance, you said whatever else is on there, but instead of this being we visited and we saw this, but is it all being documented, and is there a place we can go to see those comments, and are you filling out some sort of form so that we have that information?
We have begun to formalize that process for the site visits, making, so we know exactly what it is that we're asking every organization the same questions, and then the more formal, again, was the workbooks that they submit that we made clear to them that they were going to have to submit in the call to action toolkit when they applied to partner with us.
Do you have 100%? Are 100% providing those?
No, I was just going to say we'll be happy. We have some of those, and we'll be happy to provide that.
Are 100% of the 25 supplying those on, did you say a weekly basis, monthly basis?
About every 3 months. Yes, they are. They have to, and we are consistently following up with them until they do.
Okay. My next question is, you did mention that the students with the Sherman Kendall Foundation were up 10% for 24 out of 68. 10% of what? Are they using a curriculum or a test that we have? Do they have a pre-test and another test? What is it that the 10% number is coming from?
It's their grades with school. So the students have shared their grades with the organization that they're looking at their actual coursework, and they're increasing their actual grades by 10%. I'd have to ask additional questions to the organization for what courses that might be.
I mean, is that like the MAP test? First MAP versus second MAP? What is that? Where's that 10% coming from?
I think what she said were class grades.
Yes.
But if you're elementary and you're not graded, I don't know how they're coming up with that either.
Kendall Sherman is only serving secondary students.
Okay, so thank you. And then the last thing is, you talked a lot about a community, getting the word out to families, which I think is absolutely the most important. And I do know that there's been a lot of concern with marketing, because parents who have said to me, well, we didn't know about this, we didn't know about that. So, and I know that, I don't know whose job it is. I actually contacted you, I think, about the dance program when some people knew, other people didn't. But beyond that, what I've heard from the community is they want to know what we're doing, and we aren't doing anything. We have a website, yes. We have a Facebook, yes. We have all these things, but the community would really like to know all about these programs and what we're doing to spend our ESSER money. And I don't know. I think we're going to have a conversation later about community collaborations and communication. But is there a way that we can push that information out, because I sat down with a group last week and they didn't know anything about any of these, and they're pretty involved in the schools and supporting students. And so if people who are involved didn't know about it, and the community, again, it's their tax money, even though it's federal, would like to know what's going on. So if there's a way that we can share that.
Thank you. That's really helpful feedback.
I do. Piggybacking on that last point, Can the organizations and can the school districts spend the ARPESTR dollars on marketing costs, or is it just for programmatic costs?
That's a really excellent question, and I will have to go back into some of my notes. If it's a cost per student, so if it's built into their cost per student, they are. And we frequently talk about how partnerships are, like when we have field trips at the Discovery Center, it costs us X amount of dollars, and that includes all of the overhead for them to run their programs. It's very similar. So they are promoting, organizations are promoting through their channels as well. And if they have included that, yes. If they did not include that, then that's not a part of their budget that they planned on. And then we're helping them find those connections with schools, with counselors, with liaisons, those very targeted groups of individuals that they've identified in their proposals as wanting to connect with.
So one thing I've shared with the board that I think will be very different in terms of how we help connect students with the programming is we are going to take a very targeted approach at the school level. Each principal has identified students that need extra support. And one of the things that we are going to be very focused on is ensuring that all of the students who are currently getting extra support through our multi-tiered systems of support systems, which about 35% of our students are identified in Panorama for receiving interventions. We're going to be really simply looking at this on a school-by-school basis. What percentage of the schools receiving interventions are going to be A, scheduled into those interventions in the summer, and then B, or ongoing, they're not all in the summer, and then B, what is the attendance rate, and then C, if the students that most need to be attending are not attending, what other kind of interventions can we be offering for those students? So there will be a very school-by-school concerted effort, and frankly, I think the direct principal to student and family approach is probably the most likely successful strategy to get the students into the right programs. I think the sheer volume and magnitude of the programs, a general marketing campaign may be problematic, but that when we get our faculty and staff led by the principal at the school level directly connecting with families, I think that is our most likely opportunity for success. We have about 8,000 seats currently available for different summer programming, and it's my goal to have each school getting as many of those seats filled as possible and measuring school by school how they're doing. Real simple numerator and denominator math. If there were 300 students in a school who needed interventions, how many of the 300 do we get into programs? We will have to, as a district office, come beside the schools and help them with that. So it's not just going to be on them, but that is really the work of marketing and doing this. So Maureen is doing a fantastic job of building relationships and building those 800 seats and measuring the effectiveness. I think it's going to be a team effort for all of us to come together to support principals to make sure each school is passionate about getting the students who most need intervention into those interventions.
May I just comment, to be clear, I wasn't asking to get the marketing piece out to the community for bringing schools in. I think your approach is absolutely the way to go. It's really more, it's almost more after the fact. Here is what we're doing, so people know that we're providing those. And so that was a different period. And when did these start? Was that last year that we started? When?
Our first contracts went through board May 10th last year. So the programs last year would have started shortly thereafter. Most of those organizations began their programs in June, since most of those were for summer programs.
Well, great. I hope you do get a formalized evaluation program, because when can we go through? The 25? Is that?
September 30th, 2024.
Okay. So we got to know, we really do need to know what's working and, which ones students are attending. And I mean, it's great to have a numerator and denominator, see how many kids we get in, but if they aren't there, it's kind of like credit recovery. If they don't show up, they don't benefit. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And I've heard you are doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
The community members too as well.
Thank you.
I know I fired a lot of questions.
It's great.
Okay.
I would now like to introduce West Middle School Principal Taryn Turner to talk about the mentor program at West and what it has meant for her school and for her students. And then after Taryn, we will hear briefly from Antoine Harris, who runs the program at Roosevelt and West, with a recent expansion to serve students at Jefferson, East, and Lincoln.
Good evening. My name is Taryn Turner, and I am the proud principal of West Middle School. I just wanted to take a moment to speak with you all this evening about the impact that Mr. Harris has had on our students' experience at West. I am a first-year principal at West Middle School, and one of the immediate needs I noticed was prioritizing multi-tiered systems of support. One of the ways that we're prioritizing MTSS is by way of what we call extended learning opportunities, and that happens during lunchtime. Our lunchtime is about a 50-minute block at West Middle School, and so that's a significant amount of time in which students can be engaged in a learning experience. Mr. Harris has been at West for about 4 months now, and since he arrived, there's a group of 30 8th grade students that meet with him on a weekly basis. And the way that he has enhanced their student experience is because he serves as not only like a mentor, but he's also an accountability partner for our students. So on a weekly basis, he checks what we call the bag, the behavior, the attendance, and the grades, and it follows up with students on what their plan of action is in order to achieve their goals. And I know you were asking about specific data, but I can tell you all of the students at West that Mr. Harris meets with met their projected growth goal on the NWEA math assessment from fall of 22 to this past winter of 23 scores. So I am very proud of the work that is happening at West. I look forward to continuing the partnership. The last thing I wanted to say about our 8th grade students is what's nice is Mr. Harris is also doing what we call like a personality assessment, and that assessment then allows students to see where their strengths are in terms of potential future career opportunities. So we're also bridging college and career readiness and hopefully getting students to think about their academies and their pathways before they enter Guilford and Auburn High School. So, thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm Antoine Harris, CEO and founder of the Antoine Harris Group. And as been spoken before, we have it's what we call the self-equity program, and it's very impactful just in those two words, self and equity. A lot of us in this room have built equity in so many other places in life, socially, financially, our homes. However, when it comes to education, working with students, we're focusing on building equity within the student, within self. And she talked about, Ms. Turner talked about we do the DISC assessment for students. For kids, you have the D, the I, the S, and C. For people who do not know, that's dominant, interactive, supportive, and conscientious. But with DISC, we're taking flight with DISC and converted that into birds. A little bit more to understand for students, right? You have the eagle, that's the D. You have the parrot, that's the I. You have the dove, that's the S. And you have the owl, that is the C. So we have signage up, and they take the assessment. We go over the results of the assessment. And it's very multi-layered because there is an action plan. When they take it, there's an action plan for themselves. There's an action plan and tips for teachers and coaches. There's an action plan and tips for parents. Now we're talking about a village approach to each student that comes into this program. And just to honor, it's just been a great opportunity. There's some great kids here in RPS 205. You guys are truly blessed. And I want to kind of go back a little bit and just really shout out Earl Dotson Jr. for the introduction that we have had. And he gave me his word. He gave me his word. We worked just with initial things. And then I want to shout out Matt Simpson with Bongo Leadership Council, who has helped along the way as well, along with Maureen and Taryn. And the opportunities that I have, guys, I can't wait to see you guys see the changes that are happening with these students over the period of time. And last but not least, talked about data and getting some of that, right? The way that we do it with the Antoine Harris Group is evidence-based, and here's how we do it. First and foremost, it's relationship building. I'm coming in, a person that they don't know. We're going to build relationships for those first few weeks, right? I have value in that. There's so much value into it. Then after that, we're going to take the DISC assessment. We're going to take the DISC assessment, learn more about themselves, learn more about each other who's in the room, have a great appreciation for the differences that the people that are in that room, the students. Then we're going to go into capacity building. Planning, implementation, and then evaluation. Then that is the completion of the program. That is how we grab our evidence. We also take grades as well, submit them in the beginning. Hey, what class you guys want to pick? What you want to get better at? And then we just work intentionally. Like Principal Turner said, accountability partner, absolutely. I work alongside them, and we really work. And we do have a good time. We do have a good time, guys. Like, just help changing that experience with school, that experience with those teachers, that experience with coming in every single day. That's also a goal as well, because that relationship with school may be a little disjointed because of COVID, but now that's just our vision. And what we do at the Antoine Harris Group is we reimagine the future of education. So thank you guys for your time, and have a great rest of the night.
Could I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So the DISC assessment, I just pulled it up, and you had said, so dominance,
Yes.
and then it says inducement. You had said interactive.
According to ours, is interactive, yes.
So there are different ones. That was going to be my question.
Yes, I work with a company to get that DISC assessment.
Okay.
So it's
the next one says submission, and you said supportive. So
supportive,
they're
yes.
different. And what did you say for C, please?
conscientiousness.
And they say compliance. So
Yep.
I don't. But this is a standardized assessment. That was what I was going to ask. That's why I was looking it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, that's a great question. We are backed and supported with the EEOC and the APA, which is American Psychology Association. And it's have been tested throughout the years, and I'll be more than happy to send that information as well. And on the print-off, it has all that information as well.
That'd be great. I mean, if it's something that's really being helpful with the students you're working with.
Absolutely.
See if it other place. Thank you.
Anybody else have any more questions?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. What is the capacity you have for your program?
As of right now, I'm 30 students at each school, but with two different, at the schools that I'm at, which are West, East, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. But those are broken into their lunch times. So it's 2 sessions per school, except for Lincoln. Lincoln only have 1 session of 15 students.
Okay. And how many are on your staff that services the students?
It's just me.
It's just you?
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Good. Seems like you need more people.
Well, I mean, I've taught in a classroom for years, but as we see how things go, potentially for sure, absolutely, with scaling and building up. But like right now, I have more than enough capacity to handle the amount of students that I have right now.
Well, sounds pretty awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? All right. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Turner, and thank you, Mr. Harris, and thank you for your time. And I will see you back next month.
Thank you, Maureen, and to Ms. Turner and Mr. Harris, thank you for the efforts that you've put forth. I've always said that it would take a different strategy and a unique technique for us to be effective. And so thank you for your efforts. And I look forward to seeing that the continued growth and outcome of your efforts. And thank you, Maureen. So let's continue on. The students of Cherry Valley Elementary were given the opportunity to perform at the Ice Hogs game in January. They sang the Star Spangled Banner and Light Up the World. Thank you, Miss, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Gibble, for working with the kids, and congratulations to our students for their hard work for the performance. Also, congratulations to Auburn High School's Kayla Anderson, who was named Rockford's new Youth Poet Laureate. The Youth Poet Laureate is an honorary position for 1 year selected by representatives from the Rockford Area Arts Council, the City of Rockford, the Rockford Public Library, and members of the city's arts and literacy communities. The Poet Laureate are tasked with promoting literacy and literature among residents of all ages. This week's top item on 205 Vibe is 2023 school year registration. The featured blog post is a surprise spring Jefferson manufacturing students create flower garden. In this blog post, you will read about processes involved, the creating the meadow flowers and displaying them in front of Jefferson. Several students also share their thoughts about the experience. And while you're there, be sure to listen to our latest podcast, 5 Things to Know, International Baccalaureate RPS 205. The latest legislative news, we want to let you know to save the date Monday, May 1st, 2023 for the annual legislative meeting. We will provide more information in the coming months. Next, we will hear from Kathy Eberly, who will give us an update on the branding and marketing discussion from our last committee of the whole meeting. Kathy?
Of course not. Thank you. Good evening again. Kathy Eberly, I lead the communications department. Thank you, first and foremost, for your feedback and your thoughts in January when I was here a few months ago to talk about image and branding. We took your suggestions and are implementing those right now throughout the rest of this current school year. Your feedback really solidified our current plans and what we're working on this year and have helped us build out our plans for next year. So I'm really excited. I think it's an exciting time to be part of our team and to be able to promote a lot of the great stuff happening. So again, thank you for your feedback, and you really reiterated that we're on the right track. Our plans are going in the right direction. When I was here in January, I had mentioned that we were working on a campaign and about to launch a campaign to really promote Rockford Promise and encourage students to participate and families in the community to know about the program. So I would like to show, in case you haven't seen it online or on CBS or ABC, I'm sorry, not ABC, NBC, we'd like to show you one of our commercial spots promoting Rockford Promise now. So, Mr. Producer, please.
RPS 205 high school seniors, now is the time to think about college. You may qualify for a Rockford Promise scholarship. Attend Rock Valley College, tuition free. Deadline to apply for RVC is March 1st. To learn more and apply, visit rockfordpromise.org or scan the QR code.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Take me. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of questions lately about whether or not we as a district are investing into Rockford Promise, and the answer is that we are not putting any money into the scholarship fund, but we are supporting it through things like the branding and the promoting, and we have a counselor specifically with career and college readiness that works to get the word out to families. Is there a budget Is there, and I guess we'll see it come through. When
We do and this will come through with the budget, the 2024 budget, but we do an annual $100,000. This was the first year we did a $100,000 contribution, and we were very specific that that contribution was not to fund the scholarship fund, but was to, in fact, fund efforts and positions to grow the Rockford Promise opportunity within our schools. So that really what it does is it allows overhead costs that are necessary to ensure that scholars are aware of the opportunity and our RPS students are supported don't come out of scholarship fundraising opportunities. So we do give direct cash from the school district to Rockford Promise for that very specific purpose as opposed to general funding of scholarships.
Okay, and do we have somebody specific in college and career readiness that just works with Rockford Promise students?
We do not. They took those dollars and they hired a person, is what I believe happened.
Okay, so, but that person works for them, not us?
Correct.
For Rockford Promise?
That's right.
And then is there a budget within the communications department for Rockford Promise?
There is not. We don't have a standalone budget item, correct?
No. Okay.
We are in the process, though, with the board's feedback. The next step will be that the team will be building a budget, or will be budgeting and building a communications plan based on the board's feedback, and that is something that the details will be laid out once that plan is finalized. But the reason we came to the board was to ask for your perspective on what kind of items should be included. So if you do have other items you would like to see included, we certainly would encourage you to reach out, and I'll turn it over to Earl Dotson Jr. or Kathy to add to what I started to say there.
No, I was just going to add that in the budget that we built for next year, yes, we do have money. We've asked for a budget that surrounds not just Rockford Promise, but scholarships in general, because we have a wide array of scholarship programs that we'd like to promote. So we have added that to our budget requests for next year.
Good, and I'm glad that we're going to promote a lot of them because families seems to be looking for that information and that support. And I think somebody should just give a shout out. We were at 193 last year. I mean, this started with like 5 scholarships for Promise, and this year, is it going to be in that same range? Does anybody know?
I don't think they've held their award event yet. It's coming up still in the spring, and I believe it's at the Coronado. I don't know the date offhand.
Okay. Often they know how much money they have to give away, so they know how many they can
absolutely.
get. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, so should we pick up the discussion for where we left off last month? At this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. If we can advance the slide thank you. So this may look familiar. Last month we started a conversation, and I want to thank Chairman Pearson for bringing this work forward and continuing to advocate for this important work. And we're really in the next phase here, and that is wanting to move from where we currently are to a very intentional approach for how we reach out to our community, and a disciplined approach and a team approach, because this is ultimately going to take not only the board's efforts, but also the efforts of our administrative team to ensure that we find a way to strategically have two-way dialogue and conversations with all of the groups in our community that are so important to running a community school system. If you recall last month's meeting, we gave the board a proposal to react to in terms of 4 community groups, and the board during our discussion added the 5th bubble that you can see up there, the red college and career readiness voice. So now we have 5 different groups: community, student, family, staff, and now college and career readiness. And if we can advance the slide, what I wanted to spend our time on today is, could we advance the slide, please? starting to look at how we could use this very meeting to share the responsibility and report out about what we're learning from talking to the community. If you look at the way our board currently handles community engagement, there are expectations for the superintendent and cabinet, and right now, currently, individual board members have different strategies and efforts to interact with constituents. What I would like to suggest today with today's conversation is looking at those 5 groups, building a relatively simple checklist that is something we can refer back to at each meeting, and building a plan for the year for all of the board to share in the effort to interact with these 5 groups, and then having built into the stakeholders committee meeting a chance to have a conversation. So what I've laid out here with the help of Laura and the communications team is a really simple checklist. And for example, we could take David, who's the first person in the upper left column, and let's say David, over the last month, decided to attend a realtor roundtable with the superintendent and attended a pep rally at a school and a business roundtable event. We could check those off, and we could see what David did. We could go through each member of the board, and we could strategically make sure we are hitting all 5 of our stakeholder groups, that we are strategically sharing what we learn with each other at this meeting. So this will take an annual planning retreat probably for us to develop a strategy at the beginning of the year. And I think we could do this at the board's preference, but I would love to see the board develop a plan of exactly which groups we want to meet with, who is going to meet with which groups, and then each month we could have a conversation about how we did with meeting with those groups. So that is sort of what we're proposing here. And my questions for the board, and I really want to turn it over to you for discussion, because this ultimately is the board's work. In order to energize our work with our stakeholders, is this a strategy that you are interested in pursuing? Number one. Number two, what groups would you like to see us add to an updated draft of this checklist? So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our chairman, Ms. Pearson, and we can start to have some dialogue over, is this the right strategy, or is there a way this strategy should be modified to better fit the board? Again, our current focus is very individualized, and there isn't a real strong mechanism other than board member comments for board members to share what they're learning with their constituents. So what I would be proposing here is a more intentional front-end design and a more collaborative effort to share what we are collectively learning. I also would offer that the cabinet and the superintendent would be very willing to do something similar if the board wished. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Pearson, and I'd love to hear the board's feedback. I will be feverishly taking down notes to make any modifications that are requested by the board.
Thank you, Dr. Jarrett. I think the process of hearing from each board member will work. I'm going to start with June, and then we can work our way back to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so what exactly am I committing myself to?
So on the second sheet that you have, you can look at the areas that you would like to engage in the community or meetings, or so identifying those categories and where you would be willing to attend.
And to be clear, the board would have tremendous input in making changes to this list. This is just meant to be a conversation starter.
So conversation or commitment, I'm not sure where we're at.
I am not.
Like you want us to commit to a section, no?
Okay, well, let me say this. So first of all, the commitment we should already have, right, to be engaged with our community. So we can start now with an interest. So if you're looking at the items listed, what would interest you in being a part of?
Okay.
Hold on. You have a question?
Yes.
Sure.
So,
one moment, June.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So just as what I look at this, and what my interpretation of is just in our everyday advocacy, the way that I was looking at this, what I'm already out doing, and I can kind of plug in, just put the checks in, like, okay, so I was at an event, there were Rockford Public School students there, we had a discussion with them, that counts, instead of, is it that, or is it, I'm only going to sign up for the green block?
Okay, so we're going to come back to that because we can always add to this. Okay, so let's start with June, and then we're going to work our way around, and we'll come back to that.
Okay, so there are several things on here that I have done and continue to do. Is that what you want to hear?
Yeah, if I may, because part of what we want to do is take what we have up here and narrow it down to something that's very manageable for the board. So I think Ms. McCall gave a great example. A lot of you do a lot of this stuff already, and so if, for example, the example you gave, that's maybe something that we could add to the list. That's something that you're going to do that you feel comfortable doing. So this is just a list that we prepared based on some of the things that you already do, and the idea is how do we narrow it down? There are things up there right now that interest you, that you would do, that you could commit to, that you think that I already do this, or there's something there that that you would like to see added or taken off.
Okay, so I have been to ward meetings in my subdistrict. I've been to the Academy Expo, many athletic events, fine arts events, school family nights, PTOs. I would love to go to a student advisory council meeting. I think that would be nice. Pep rally sounds good. Chamber business events, I've been to some of those. College open houses, I'm not sure what that is, but that sounds interesting. The Downtown Leadership Club, I would be interested in that. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, June. Ms. Stan.
Ms. who?
You're next.
Okay. I see this big green block with government. I'm county. I live in the county. A lot of my sub-district is in the county. We also have, part of my sub-district is in Loves Park, McChesney Park. Part of it's over in Bloom. So I'm not sure what pieces would have to do with that. It's so I don't have ward meetings. It's not as simple as being in the city is my point. So that would have to be, I think Park District is because of our communication, coordination, collaboration, whatever, with activities. Who would be setting up neighborhood meetings? Is this like we set up a neighborhood meeting, or the district is setting up a neighborhood meeting? What is, when you put this on here, I'm not sure what it involves.
So again, I think we would have a process to build a schedule together at the beginning of the year, and to some of the previous conversation already from Board Member McCall, I think ideally we would largely build this from existing opportunities rather than building new ones. But if the board does find there are gaps or things that we do need to add more, then we would. But I think we would probably be starting with existing community groups, existing community meetings or neighborhood meetings whenever possible.
So if we're looking at something, we had a conversation, you and I, about ER 815. Do they fall under a neighborhood meeting? Do they fall under, they don't fall in here anywhere that I see, and that's a community voice. So are you asking us to add if necessary? Because I think that.
Absolutely, we can add a group.
They've reached out and asked for input. I mean, I'm fine, realtor, media, county, expo, the student meetings, the fine arts. I've been attending PTOs. I am set up to go to one of the parent-teacher conference nights. I don't know how much that'll. DLT, I'm still participating on that. the chamber events, and I don't see in here school visits, because I think that's a big part of this. We had a conversation about the fact that going into a building.
I apologize. We have a whole separate page for organizing this, all 41 of our school, or 44 of our schools,
Okay.
including our charters, where that would be an option for board members as well. Because just as we would want to get into these different community groups, Ms. Lammer has also created a document that would allow us to divvy up the opportunity to attend schools and report out, either with the superintendent, or we could work out processes to do it independently as well.
Your turn, Tim.
Well, Tim and David are only going to be at this for another 2.5 months. So, in general, I'll just say my approach during my time on the board is I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk to me. And so if you're just saying what am I interested in, or what would I do, I'd do any of these if somebody expresses an interest. So I think really what you're going to be looking at doing is somebody needs to identify the opportunities. Because I think I made this comment before. It seems like there are fewer opportunities than there used to be. People just don't seem to be meeting as much, or maybe the meetings just aren't as well known. But identify the opportunities and then find out who's interested in which opportunity. And you may have more than one. I mean, one thing, way or another, I've probably done everything on this list, other than probably not staff affinity group, probably nothing, and I don't even know what to call this color. Whatever color this is, I don't think I've done any of that. But I think I've done everything else.
You did do bargaining.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Haley?
So I think this is a good list to start with, so I'm really open to going to any of these and all of these as part of a community engagement. I see that some of these will be just there in attendance, just to be there, which I guess is good, especially when it comes to like pep rallies or athletic events. If we have an opportunity to make ourselves known, I think we should do so. But as far as meeting and establishing a schedule so that we're hitting, all of these areas as a board, is a great approach. So I'm open and willing to go to just about any of these. I can't think of anything right now that I would add except for what was already mentioned. But whenever we could speak or open ourselves up for conversation regarding RPS 205, I think we should be available and ready to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Haley. Ms. McCall?
Okay, just the way I operate. I'm always out in the community. A few weeks ago, I went bowling, and I saw the bowling tournament with the high schools there. And, I didn't make an announcement, hey, school board members, in the building or anything, but I did engage with parents and students there, right? So I guess for me, I'm open to committing to attending anything, but just in my normal everyday activities, I find myself with opportunities to engage the community and the constituents. Just this past Friday, I was at Auburn High School speaking with one of the groups of students. And, when you say visited the school, I didn't make the principal. I didn't call the principal down, let her know that I was in the building or anything. I went in and did what I had to do, and then I left. Same with this past Saturday, there was a college fair event at Rock Valley College. I was there, and I engaged with the students and the parents. So for me, this is merely like a checklist, like, did I cover this? I do like the fact that we have this information, this form there to see what the board engagement is, but I also wanted to have an opportunity, like, where can I say this stuff at? Right. It was a great turnout at the Rock Valley College Fair, HBCU College Fair. It was a great turnout at the bowling night, with the bowling tournaments and things like that I sometimes fall into. I don't know where to actually put it. So something like this will be great for me as far as tracking my engagement. But other than that, I think you've hit everything. I like the pieces where we're engaged in speaking to the students directly. It is my job to encourage students to advocate for themselves and their school. So when I was, there Friday, a lot of students, hey, wait, I didn't know I can come to a school board meeting, that type of thing. So you want to be able to, like Mr. Rollins said, any opportunity that's open, I'm willing to come and speak to. So I think this is a great start, and put me down for everything. I'll hit it eventually. I'll hit it eventually.
Thank you, Ms. McCall. Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. I wish I had Ms. McCall's ambition, but maybe I do. I just don't quite have the time. So, so a couple of questions about process, if I can channel my inner Mike Connor. Will there be a discussion about how we're going to plan our presence at each of these events? I see athletic events, for instance. Are we going to have some discussion ahead of time saying, this is your importance in being at this event? It's more than just watching a girls' middle school basketball game. We want you to do this. And then, is there a reporting back mechanism on this? So what sort of discussion are we hoping to create with participation in each of these events? And what are the expectations of the administration in attending these things? With that said, nearly everything on here I would be very happy to do. Actually, I would do them all, just some I'm going to be better suited for than others. But really just knowing those two things, what does that discussion ahead of attending something look like? Where will we meet? Who's going to decide who's going to do what? And then what reporting back is going to be expected of us?
So if I could, I think multiple people have asked similar questions, so let me just share tangibly what I'm thinking, but ultimately the board would make these decisions. But what I would be suggesting is we would come together with some extended period of time probably and create kind of a list that's the plan for the year and add a more tangible list of actual meeting dates once the board decides what you want to spend your time on. It would be up to the administration to come up with lists of dates and opportunities to attend these. So there'd be a planning part on the front end. Number two, I think this committee would be a great place to engage in two types of discussion. One, sort of how are we doing at covering what we committed to at the beginning of the year? And two, I think one of the real big insights from today's conversation is it's also going to be, what did I happen to do that wasn't on the list? Right. And I would imagine a very free-flowing conversation guided by our committee chair where we would be having some kind of a chance to report out what we've learned and share that. And so we would be modeling for the community that we have made a commitment to interact with large groups of the community each month, and that the collective efforts of the board, I think, will likely be very impressive. And I don't know that we always do a good job telling that story to the community of how much we are out in the community. So there's often an assumption, well, I didn't talk to a board member last month, so I guess they're not talking to anybody, when the reality is you've all given an incredibly impressive list already of the events you have either covered or would like to cover. So I think the idea would be this would become part of the rhythm of this committee, would be some kind of an annual plan and an ongoing monthly discussion about how we're doing, but also, I would hope, about what we're learning from each other as we're out in the community, and so that we can see themes. I think a final thing you can do is, if you wanted to, you could also look at assigning some of this work to the superintendent and to the management team so that areas the board is unable to cover, we could have covered as well. So we could really, as a larger team, cover as much of the community as possible, as well as adding in some of the impromptu things that we won't think of in advance. I really like what Ms. McCall is saying about, hey, there are sometimes things that are unplanned are the best opportunities to engage with the community. So with that, back to Chairman Pearson.
So I'm a chairperson, and the whole point of this is going beyond the boardroom and connecting with our community. And so this is not, or it shouldn't be a strain for board members to be willing to get out into the community in whatever capacity. So the list is just a suggestion. It is not something that it is mandated that you make a commitment to everything on the list, but let's not forget that we have a responsibility to connect with our community. And so we don't want to make this difficult. We don't want to make it hard or fearful. It is just making sure that there is a presence, whether it is at school. Some of the things on this list, I haven't been to a business roundtable, so I look at these as opportunities to be able to learn more of other different aspects of the community and their expectation from board members. So this is no more. One of the things that I will never forget is I had an opportunity to attend a staff meeting. And while it was viewed differently by other board members, I think that it was an opportunity to hear directly from from teachers and to have a presence there meant a lot. And so I think that we have to take a different approach in being present. And sometimes and this is something, a question that the community asks, like where are the board members? And do they do anything besides going to the board meeting? And so this is just an opportunity for us to really engage in the community. Faith-based organizations, I'm not a stranger to, so I would love to look at something different to be a part of, and engaging with students, whether it be one-on-one and in hearing from parents. You'd be surprised of the challenges families really face with other than seeing it in a presentation or on paper. So this is really what, and as far as holding ourselves accountable, when we, at the next committee of the whole, we can go around like we did and just share what we engaged in, pros and cons, if there be any cons, but I think you can't go wrong making yourself present in your community.
Anybody else? I would say I don't think it's a strain. What's difficult is the fact that it's a list, and there aren't any. I'll take that easy answer. I would go to anything, and I do go to schools, and I do go to PTOs, and I do, go to events. But if you're going to ask me to sign up to go to something in particular, I need to know what the event is and what the date is and how it fits into my life. It's not that I'm not willing. And I'm willing to schedule my own, as Tim said, when people reach out to me to talk and to go have conversations, no problem at all. But if we're being asked to commit to something, I need more information. And so I understand that you're saying, what are your interests? I think all of us, I mean, June and I end up being the beginning here, but it's not that we're not willing to do any of the others. I don't feel that it's a strain to do that. I just feel like if we're going to put a calendar together, we need more information. That's all.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. I just thought it'd be easy to just make it simple. So you don't have to look at it as a list. Yeah, check your calendar, what you can do. The effort alone speaks volumes. And in terms of events, like when they come up, I finally got to a basketball game, and the announcer made a statement about Sue Danforth and Fran Van Vliet feeding the basketball team. Later, I found out that Ms. Danforth have contributed thousands of dollars to schools and feeding and sponsoring events. But you learn that by engagement and being present. So I didn't take it, and if you perceive that I was indicated that it was difficult, and our time is actually over, and we can always continue this conversation, but I must conclude so we can go to the next, unless the next person up wants to yield more time.
Well, governance will yield because we don't have anything hardly, but I would like to know what the process was going to be to give calendars and dates, because I can't check my calendar if I don't have a date when something would be. And so what is the process and who will be putting together such a list? Will that come out of your committee or?
So this is a discussion, and we can always work out the details. You're not no one is expecting you to show up tomorrow at a school. So that information will be provided. You'll have that information. Use this list as a guide. If you want to add something, you're more than willing to do that. You will have an opportunity to pick a date or whatever works for you and how you want to do it. When I visit a school, I typically email the principal and ask for a date and work it out and show up. So whatever works for you and what you desire to do, I'm sure that will work.
And I mean, I'll just add, Ms. McCullough, our committee, our team will be very involved in this work and developing a calendar. We'll be working with also the board secretary to make sure that it's communicated to the board members as well. So we'll be helping develop that.
Are there any other questions? There's a last bit, and we'll be finished with this piece of it. Thank you, Dr. Jarrett, for your input. The last slide we have is the board calendar for the month of February. As you see, there are several items that are highlighted. For more information on these, you can always visit the board calendar and click on the event. Any additional questions or comments? If not, I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. Mr. Rollins?
You're welcome.
I'm going to ask you to take over with the Planning and Development Committee portion of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda has to do with we're beginning our budget development cycle. And I just thought I'd take a couple of minutes because we've got some newer board members to talk about what our budget cycle looks like and what the budget development cycle looks like. So our fiscal year, the school district's fiscal year, runs from July 1st to June 30th. And we are not legally required to have a budget in place before the beginning of the fiscal year, but the board did used to have a policy requiring us to have the final budget approved before the beginning of the fiscal year. And for most of the years I've been on the board, that's what we did. Our last CFO, Michelle Yar, asked us to change that policy. For one reason, one of our largest revenue sources is the state, which is on the same fiscal year as us, and they often wouldn't have their budget done before we were finalizing our budget. So the process now is that we will develop what is really a tentative budget to be in place by July 1st. And then what the board does is, probably in May, I guess, is do a sort of a funding resolution, giving the administration the authority, because we won't have a final budget in place, giving the administration the authority to spend up to a certain percentage of the draft budget. And then the actual budget will get finalized before the end of the calendar year, sometime in the fall. The other thing that's changed is when I first got on the board, the administration would bring us the proposed budget a month before it was going to be approved. And it's a $500 million budget. And so it was a long night. And we had one evening in particular I can remember, and I'm sure Dr. Jarrett does as well, where we were horse trading on the floor, trying to get enough funding to do some new buses. And we all decided that wasn't just a really good way to do budget development. And so what the administration committed to is to be more transparent in the process, earlier in the process, and to provide us, they do their work in the fall, and then to start providing us on a department by department basis with the proposed budgets for each department. And that is the cycle that we're starting tonight. We're going to hear from 2 different departments, and we're going to hear their budget presentations. This is also what I found. I think this is a much better process, by the way. What I found is this is also just a really good time to learn the organization and ask questions of each of the department chairs as they're making their budget presentations, because budget priorities represent the priorities of the organization. So what we're approving or what we're talking about with the budget is going to reflect our organizational priorities. The other thing I'm just going to mention, there's very few certainties in life, but the 2 certainties are that Mr. Siegel and I will not be voting on this budget when it comes for approval. So we reserve the right to ask questions, but I do sort of hope, and I put the word out to the person who's running in my sub-district, I really hope the people who are running for the school board are actually watching these presentations, because they are going to be voting. Whoever gets elected and who's ever sitting here when that budget gets put up for approval, they're going to be voting on it. So I really hope that people are paying attention, and if you can't watch in real time, that you'll at least take the time to view it online. And having said all that, I will turn it over to Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown, our CFO, to present the update of the fiscal year 24 budget, development priorities, and assumptions.
All right, good evening. Connor, if you're back there, if you can pull it up. So, as Mr. Rollins said, we actually started this process in October of last year. So we've already been working on the budget here for about 4.5 months already. And what we did in October was we gave kind of a preliminary assumption of how we were going to go about developing the budget for the upcoming FY24 fiscal year. What we've done now is kind of given you an update on where we're at on the assumptions as of February of this year, as we actually start the real budget presentations. So real quick, where we're at now, this hasn't really changed except for the tax levy portion. We still believe the evidence-based funding is probably going to come in about a 4% increase. The evidence-based funding is the big chunk of the state funding that we get from Illinois. The tax levy, we did change that, and we did not include any new property, and we did not include any CPI, and that was per the board's direction in November of last year when we finalized the levy. And then CPPRT is a corporate personal property replacement tax. In future years in FY24, that is estimated to decline due to economic conditions, just because we have had so much money that's been circulating because of the COVID relief funds. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that in just a second. We do have a couple of other ones, just grants that we have from the federal government. We think those are going to be steady, and we think the regular just local funding is going to be steady as well. So as far as evidence-based funding goes, you can see there that we're expecting to get in FY24 about $184 million from the state. It only shows a 4% increase over the previous year. The main reason that you're not seeing a larger increase, as you've seen in some of the previous years, is because we got so much corporate personal property replacement tax last year that it actually reduced the amount of evidence-based funding that we're going to get. So you'll see that we're not getting quite as much as what we would normally see in an increase. The evidence-based funding is actually broken up of two separate components. The first one is called the base minimum funding, and the base minimum funding is the previous year's total funding carried over to the next year. So if you look at 2023, you'll see a total of $177 million. If you look at what we're estimating for 2024, you'll see that base minimum funding carrying over into FY24, and then you'll see that roughly $7 million additional in tiered funding that we're anticipating that we're getting right now. Now, the Illinois State Board of Education has asked the governor's office for much, much more than that $7 million would represent for us, but we do not believe that the legislature will fund more than probably what they have been funding the last few years, which is about $350 million into the tiered funding calculation, which for us would be about $7 million. The property tax levy, obviously that's a big source of revenue for us. Again, for levy 22, no new property or CPI included. For levy year 23, we have plugged in, taking it on new property, but at this point, nothing on CPI. So that's just a preliminary assumption that you'll see going forward. As far as property taxes, they are collected, as you guys know, in two different fiscal years. So the 2022 tax bill that's going to come out, payable in 2023, half of it's paid in that May-June timeframe. The rest of it's actually paid in September, which is why we end up straddling fiscal years on the property taxes. As far as total revenue, you can see there what we're projecting to come in, and also history from the last 15 years or so. The 2023 is asterisk there. We still are estimating that because obviously the tax bills are not finalized yet, because the assessors are still working with appeals and those kinds of things to actually nail down the assessed value. But those are projections on where we think things are going to come in. You'll see that we're anticipating in the second from the right column, tax levy for 2022, about $156,264,000 coming in. As far as corporate personal property replacement tax, we are anticipating that we're actually going to do better in this current fiscal year than we had originally anticipated. You can see there that we had budgeted $42,149,038, and if you can look at the footnote down at the bottom there, the last sentence there, FY23 collections to date are already $45 million. So we're actually ahead, and we still have 3 payments of corporate personal property replacement tax money to come in March, April, and May, and those are typically the biggest months. So if we get dollars that are similar to last year's March, April, and May payments, there's a good chance that we will collect more than actually what we collected in FY22. So we could be in excess of that $66 million number for the current fiscal year. Now, we do anticipate that it'll go back down in FY24, and then for the assumptions, going forward, we're probably going to settle back in around that $35 million number on a consistent basis. As far as expenditure goes, we're anticipating to be right around 3% for salaries. We may be a little higher than that when we give, kind of finalized updates, as we work through the spring and summer months here. We've been working with Mr. Zediker on some of the wage compression issues that we've had, and, we've mentioned those in the board in previous months. So we may see a number that's closer to, 3.5% or 4%. The CPI increase, or supplies and purchase services, 6% increase for estimated inflation. We're seeing every bit of that right now. That number might end up being light. So, we're just kind of watching that right now. And for benefits, and you will see this, coming up here when we talk about insurance, we're assuming that health claims are going to come in right at about $56 million, which is, fairly consistent with where it's been in the last year. And really all kind of other costs should be flat. So you can see the CPI still continues to run hot. In December, we were at 6.5%. That sets us up to be able to take a 5% CPI increase in the levy that we will work on in the coming fall if the board chooses to do that, because we are in a tax cap county, so we can't take the entire amount of a 6.5% CPI, but we could take up to 5%. So just to get that on your radar screen right now. It is abating somewhat, but it's coming down very slowly. The FY23 projections at the March Committee of the Whole meeting, we're going to give you kind of an outlook of where we think we're going to end the FY23 calendar year, and we're going to do an update on that one at the March meeting. So any questions on where we're sitting with the assumptions right now? No? Okay, thank you.
I do. Greg?
Yep.
So why is the CRPT coming in so high?
It's really because of all the COVID money that's floating around and cycling around in the state. You know, people are still have quite a bit of cash on hand. Now that's going away as inflation has kind of started to eat away at it. But the tax receipts coming in from businesses right now are just coming in way beyond what they thought. Plus, the state government has been dumping a lot of money into the economy as well, and that just kind of perpetuates, the cycle. And as prices continue to go up, the receipts for the taxes go up as well. So, it's been kind of a little. It's been a good cycle for us, but it's kind of a vicious cycle because that's a big cliff that we're going to fall right off of when that money dries up, and it's only one-time money. That doesn't come every year, so. You don't want to get dependent on that as a source of funding to pay for the everyday costs of the district. Those are the kind of things you want to save for the one-time things that are one and done. We got one-time money, we're going to spend it on a one-time thing.
And did I hear you say you're building your budget on us? First I heard you say taking new property.
That's for the projection for next year, just to take CPI on or just the taxes on new properties the way we have it modeled right now. That'll be up to the board to decide that. We've just plugged that in.
So when we keep the levy flat and we don't take CPI.
Well, right now we've assumed that we haven't taken it for FY24.
Okay.
But we've only captured new property, which we're estimating to probably be around $300,000 or $400,000.
But that was last year, not.
That was for the coming year. We haven't done any CPI or any new property for the levy that we just did in November. We didn't take anything on that. So that's why we have a flat one going into next year.
All right. So what you're talking about is the year after.
Yeah, we're talking for FY24.
Which
correct.
Is half and half.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
So I just want to say, so CPPRT, which is a funny term, is really, it's corporate income tax paid to the state corporate income tax, which the state then shares a portion of that back with units of local government throughout the state. And there's no real formula for it, which introduces a sort of a randomness to it because the state can just decide on a year-to-year basis how much they're going to pay us. And if you look at slide 11, you'll see there was a year that it went down. And what actually happened that year was that the state was having financial problems and decided that they had overpaid all of the units of local government, and they clawed it all back. And not all. They clawed a portion of it back after they'd already given it to us. So that was not a fun year.
No. And they've also sometimes decided that they're going to fund other related units of government with that money and then not give it to the school districts too. So they've done that by using some of that money to fund the regional offices of education throughout the state, and it's kind of at their whim on how they distribute it out.
Okay, if there's no other questions for Dr. Brown, let's go into the actual budget requests. The first department is Human Resources, Health Insurance, and Equity. Tonight, we'll start with Mr. Matt Zedeker, Chief Human Resource Officer, followed by Dr. Antoine Reed, Chief DEI Officer. They'll present their 2024 budget requests for Human Resources, Health Insurance, and Equity.
All right, good evening. It is my honor to be the first to launch our budget proposals for the year. So we will go over Human Resources. I will not spend a bunch of time on the organizational charts that come through, but this is the org chart in terms of departments that report up through human resources. So we have accountability, benefits, allocations compliance, we have our talent development, and then our core employee relations. You can see there the org chart for our employee relations, which includes our HR generalists and our talent acquisition team. Talent development organizational chart. Allocations and compliance. And then we have our benefits on the top of that slide, and then our accountability team on the bottom of that slide. You do see that the Director of Accountability is open. That is currently vacant. We are interviewing currently for the replacement for that position. So just some highlights as we begin with talent acquisition. I think the biggest highlight I'd like to point out for the board is the last bullet coming and stemming from our standards of service data and verbatim. Sarah Jeske and her team really worked on improving the communication process with our buildings in terms of new hires. We have a goal to always touch point with new hires within 24 hours. But what we heard from the principals is that they weren't quite sure where their new hires were at in the process. And so taking some of that feedback, Sarah and her team have really worked on streamlining that communication and more frequency with our building principals as they have individuals going through that process. As we look at talent development, I'd say the highlight there for us is the increased partnering with departments to create training videos. I would use Dr. Brown and Financial Services as a good example of partnering with talent development to ensure that processes, how-tos are put into video format so that employees can access those, and that those are things that we will be expanding to other departments as well. Accountability highlights over the last course of the year, really finalizing and updating that strategic plan. We still continue to oversee all of the major processes for academic return on investment. And now we have shifted from the creation of the system-wide framework to implementing the system-wide framework and monitoring how that implementation is going at the schools. And then finally, with benefits, we continue with all the normal benefits work. Over this course of this last year, we did work to add a 457 option in terms of retirement to go along with our 403B that would mirror what the state is doing with certified staff with the state plan. So as we get into the budget, this slide is a summary page that would include the core HR with talent acquisition and employee relations with our talent and generalists. It includes talent development and accountability. So you can see as we combine all three of those departments under HR, we do have a slight increase overall of almost $31,000. Most of that is attributed to salaries and benefits. I will explain further on in the presentation in terms of purchase services, but you see a large decrease there, and that's some shifting of contracts from a contractual way to pay to kind of a per test taken under the accountability, and that we've got some shifting with our learning management system and the number of licenses. So you see an adjustment there with a couple of different contracts. So as we get into the human resources budget itself, again, taking a look at purchase services where the largest decrease is, you will see in our contracts tab that is related to Schoology, which is our learning management system and what we use for professional learning. We were able to decrease supplies by $3,000. So overall, from a human resources standpoint, we have cut our budget by almost $9,000. As we look at the details of the contracts, you'll see slight increases with many of our contracts in terms of the natural increases of doing business. You see just a slight increase for our unemployment tracker, and then you will see, again, referencing that Power School group, that almost $11,000 reduction in that as well. And then our applicant tracking, that did go up a little over $3,000. So in total, our contracts year over year are roughly flat, just a little bit of a savings at $214. So we move on to talent development. They have an increase of a little over $58,000 total to theirs. Again, a lot of salary and benefits that are included in that increase. They were able to decrease purchase services just slightly under $500. We saw a decrease of over $2,000 in their supplies, as well then as just a slight increase with non-capital. So as we look at the contracts with talent development, you can see year over year they're staying consistent. Public School Works is our software for mandated training for all of our employees. But when we look at facility rentals and potential professional learning trainers, we do budget for some what ifs that come up for needs for venues or the ability to contract with professional learning providers if necessary. That's why you see that flat year over year. Some years we've had to utilize it. Others, we've been able to reallocate those dollars into other areas. Then we look at accountability, salaries and benefits. You see a decrease actually of salary and benefits as we look at, we had an exiting employee who had compensation at the very high end of the salary range, and the replacement for that individual as she retired is at the low salary at the end of the range. And so you see that decrease with turnover and replacement of the incumbent. Purchase services, this is where you see that large decrease. We have moved with College Board from a contract with College Board to how we pay for tests for AP and for our National Merit Scholarship qualifying tests. So we do it on a per pupil expenditure. So we've transitioned and how we've allocated those dollars. But you can see that we have an overall decrease of a little over $18,000 within the accountability budget. And looking at contracts for accountability, K-12 Insight, we did renew. That covers both our Let's Talk as well as our surveys. The reason for the decrease with K-12 Insight, with the last contract we had several addendums for some follow-up focus groups and other things that we added to the surveys, and after executing those for a couple of years, we were not seeing a return on investment. So we pulled those out of the contract with the ability to add them back in if we so choose, but it was not something that we rolled over into the renewal of that contract. And then we did remove from a Fund 18, it was grant funded. ECRA, for those of you that were on the board, remember this was the company that helped to work for our scorecard in its original format when we had the old version of our school scorecard and accountability structure. They used local norming and had various formulas and ways to come up with our scores. With the new system, with our system-wide framework and our new accountability system and new scorecard, we no longer needed ECRA's service. And so we have discontinued working with ECRA. So just really looking at a return on investment for all of those different components of HR, continuing to help recruit, retain staff, professionally develop our staff. We want to gain efficiencies where we can, and certainly continue to implement and monitor district accountability initiatives. Mr. Rollins, would you like me to pause here before going into Fund 11 or going into Fund 11?
Well, why don't we pause and see if anybody's got questions about what he's talked about so far. Mrs. McCulloch?
Oh, mine's quick. Director of Accountability, who was our last one?
Brooke Peterson.
Okay, so that's been, what is it, January or so?
Yep, she just exited out a few weeks ago.
So it hasn't been long. I was just curious. Thank you.
Ms. Stanford?
Question about the 7% increase in salaries and benefits for talent development.
Yes. So within talent development, we did a position analysis on 2 different positions within the talent development team. We moved one position from a specialist to a coordinator level, which came with a raise, and then we moved a coordinator to a manager to match up duties and responsibilities with the appropriate level of responsibility and title. So that's why you see a little bit larger increase within that department.
Okay, and then also $100,000 increase in supplies for accountability?
Yes, so that's where you see the switch with that moves from our contracted services with College Board to how we pay on the per pupil.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I just had a quick question. So we had a period of time when we were losing HR generalists to the private sector. Is that stabilized?
Yes, it's actually been very stable. Where we've lost our generalists most recently is we've actually promoted one to manager, but we have not seen an exodus of generalists to the private sector.
Okay, and are we fully staffed?
We will be fully staffed after the board meeting on the 14th. We were down an HR talent acquisition specialist, which will be on the board, and then actually an HRS coordinator. Michelle just submitted her resignation, and we went through the interview process to find a replacement, so that individual will be on the board as well. But from a HR generalist perspective, we're fully staffed.
Okay, thanks. Mm-hmm. Any other questions, Ms. Pearson?
Yeah, I just have a quick question in regards to the accountability positions. Who's covering that area now?
Me.
And just really brief, what does all that entail?
I'm so glad you asked, Ms. Pierce. I can tell you, really what the accountability is and what I'm doing in the interim. So the accountability team helps to monitor our system-wide framework processes. So in the fall, we just finished our first round of standards of practice observation. So we have to take that data, get it into the system to be able to create reports and drill downs for all of our buildings. They help to run our data governance with Jason Barthel and team. So that takes a look at our group of principals and how that data gets turned into usable reports and systems. Surveys, so currently we have the 5 Essential Survey and our school quality survey being executed. So the accountability team oversees all of those processes. And then the PDSA process with our tier process, so our tier 1, 2, and 3 with academic return on investment. So we have 2 current tier 3 studies going on, Reading Horizons and Freshman Academy. And Dr. Jarrett will be leading the board through a conversation next board meeting on picking 2 new tier 3 studies. So all of those large projects fall within the accountability framework.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I guess go ahead with the health insurance.
So then we'll present the health insurance fund. So I refer to this as Fund 11, which is separate outside of HR, working very closely with Dr. Brown and his team. Most of Fund 11 is certainly contracts. And so as we take a look at all of the contract details within Fund 11, a little caveat that Dr. Brown and I still are examining all of our claims. So as we look at where we're projecting some of our medical and dental claims, that still could be adjusted based off of some lag reports. We will finalize those certainly projections before we begin open enrollment this spring, but that is something that we are monitoring very closely. So as you take a look at this screen, we do see an increase in insurance administration for Blue Cross. We are projecting a decrease over where we were at with FY23 to FY24 for those medical and dental claims. We are currently running under budget from our projections for this year, which is good because we know last year was quite a year in terms of operating over what we expected. So right now where we're seeing our reports, that is good news. We see a larger increase with our prescription, so our Express Scripts. So we're seeing a little bit over a $3 million increase there. And then the chronic disease management, that is something that we discontinued as we evaluated the data with Active Health Management and decided to discontinue that service. As we continue on with contracts, we see an increase with our leave of absence vendor Reed Group, and then increases with stop loss and Teladoc. So in total, as we're looking at combining all of those with the medical claims, right now we're projecting to be under by about $1.7 million from Fund 11. One thing that we will be adding in there that Mr. Rollins has asked of us for the last several years, we will be going out and bidding out an audit for next fall to do a dependent audit on our health insurance. That was something that was done about 8 years ago. And so we will be reserving and budgeting dollars for that to make sure that audit is conducted this fall on our health insurance. So again, on return on investment for Fund 11, certainly want to continue to take a look at mitigating healthcare costs, providing those quality benefits, providing customer service to our retirees, and continuing a wellness-conscious employee group.
Ms. McCulloch?
What is the contract that we have for the mental health for the staff? Don't we have?
Yep, that's in Teledocs. It doesn't show here because that's through a grant funding. This one is actually coming out of our Fund 11, and so that is out of ARPS or out of grant funds for the mental health portion.
Okay, couple of comments, and then I think I do have a question. But the comment is, I'm just pointing out, this is our second largest expenditure behind salaries. I mean, if you look at these numbers, you know, if you add everything up, if you add the medical and the prescription, the pharmacy, it's, you know, you're talking $60 million. And this is also an area where you can have some pretty wild swings. And Mr. Zediker alluded to that. It's the first year after the pandemic, and the theory is that people weren't getting treatment during the pandemic. I think we saw what was a $6 or $7 million increase in our costs just in 1 year. You can also see, just based on what they're projecting on the prescription drugs, this is what our consultants have been pointing out to us year after year. Our growth area has been prescription drugs. There are some very expensive prescription drugs out there that work. They actually work, but they're very expensive, and that's a number that just keeps going up every year. Which leads me to the one question that I had. So I was reading an article the other day about these new, like Amazon now apparently is coming out with something where you can get unlimited generic drugs for $5 a month. Mark Cuban is coming out with something. You know, these people are trying to attack this opaque pricing in the prescription drug world. Are we positioned to look into any of that?
So I haven't had those types of particular conversations with our vendor. A couple of things that we're looking at as Dr. Brown and I engage in some of this work. Number one is, as part of our RFP process on the wellness centers with the vendors who are bidding, part of that is asking their ability to house tier 1 or generic drugs, so we have some kind of pharmacy within those wellness centers, which would provide significant cost savings. We will be doing another audit on our pharmaceutical spends from Express Scripts to find out what the increase is of usage of that generic or tier 1. The last audit that we did 2.5 years ago showed us about 4 to 5% less in terms of usage of those tier 1s than what normal plans would see. So that's something we're keeping our eye on. But in terms of those particular conversations, we haven't had those just yet, but those are always something that we're looking at.
That reminds me, and I can't remember if we've had this conversation with the full board or not, but for for the whole time that I've been on the board, 12 years, we've off and on talked about the district having its own clinic staffed by its own physician. The city does that. I think Woodward Governor does that. Some other large employers do that. I think the county, does. Yes. The county does that currently?
Yep.
What we were told early on is that it didn't really make sense for us because they didn't think they could get the utilization because our employees are spread out so widely across the district. But I think that the calculus is changing, and one of the reasons why the calculus is changing is people are having a hard time getting primary care physicians in Rockford. So the administration is going out for an RFP, and they are going to look at doing, and that is, I had asked Mr. Zediker that when we went through this preliminary, that's all built into the number for the medical dental claims.
Correct.
So the cost of running that clinic, of operating that clinic, and you know they would be paying a third party contractor to do it. The cost of it is built into the medical dental claims, and the assumption is that that's going to then reduce our actual claims by more than the cost of running the clinic. So, you know, the board, whenever that comes to the board, is that when do you think that's going to come?
I believe it's the end of March. Is that right, Dr. Brown, that we'll be bringing that forward?
Okay.
Middle of April, yep.
Middle of April? Okay. All right, well, anyway, so we'll have that conversation, but be thinking about that. And you know what it is. It's a little bit of a leap of faith. It's a leap of faith that whatever the cost is going to be more than offset by the savings to the district of actually having somebody there that people can use and will help manage their health. So it's something to be thinking about. Anybody else have any questions on the health insurance fund? Okay, thank you, Mr. Zediker.
Thank you.
And I think next up is Dr. Whoops, sorry.
I do, I'm sorry. Because I've asked you this question, I don't know if you have the answer currently, but we have a few drugs that are very expensive, you know, and you actually gave me a number for,
I don't know the number offhand. We have a list of kind of our top 5 expensive drugs in terms of that. Categorically, cancer drugs are always at the top. Upon our last summit, actually the largest increase that we saw with some of the higher cost drugs was infertility that we saw over the last course of the year that showed an increase. But I don't have the number in terms of what those top 5 represent in terms of spend.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Dr. Reed.
All righty. Thank you for allowing me to present on the Equity Department's budget. A lot smaller than Matt's team. You can go to our small department. And the next slide. Oh, wow. Big time, Matt. So this is us in a nutshell. We are broken down into the recruitment phase and the equity phase for our department. The equity department this year has really been strategic about our focus on staff belonging and retention, being really strategic when we do our affinity spaces that we follow up with surveying and making sure that our staff is coming back to RPS. That also lends its hand to student belonging, which has been our focus this year, and being a support for the principals and our red schools and all our schools, to that matter. Also getting out to the family and community and developing those deeper partnerships in our community and embedding equity across our district. One of the things that we came up this year within the equity department is a Tier 1 toolkit that all our schools can use as it relates to things that align with supporting our scholars and making sure that they just don't come to school, but they come to school and belong. When it looks at our recruitment department, one of our prouder moments this year is our partnership with Central State. That group is coming on our campus. We're going back and forth with them, and that partnership has been tremendous for us this year. We have other universities that are trying to mimic what we're doing with Central State, so really feel proud about that partnership there. We've been really focusing on our educational job fairs, and while we're looking at minority teacher recruitment, we're also looking at counselors, social workers, and other auxiliaries when we're going out into these fairs. Definitely our hiring incentives have been very important for our initiatives this year. Our clinical and student teaching also, and our paid student teaching has allowed some of our own staff members to become some of our employees this year. So when we're looking at our teacher pathways and programs, that is a highlight that our recruitment department has been focused on this year. And it's paying dividends as we see those programs are filling up, or now we're looking for more space and more opportunities because we're maxing out in some of these opportunities this year. This is our budget. Just really quickly here, we're pretty much the same everywhere. The only difference you're going to see is that the Kelly Services, that's our subs for the NIU LEAP program. We won't need that money next year. Every other year we need that money. When they're doing their clinicals and student teaching, that's year 2. So that first year that we have the people in the program, they do not do that, so we don't need subs for them. So we reallocated that money throughout other lines within our budget. So everything else is pretty much staying the same. We are adding a new equity consultant firm to replace the one that we were with. Our Educational Weekly is something that we are adding because they're strategically focused on creating educators, and that's a platform that allows us to hire directly educators. This is our budget overall that includes our salaries and benefits, our purchase of services, our supplies, Our supplies went up a little bit because we're finding out when we're going out into these recruiting atmospheres that other places are bringing gear and swag and other things, so we had to kind of up what we did to match some of these other places so we can compete. So that's one of the only places that we're going to increase there. And our miscellaneous budget is going down because we reallocated it to other spaces within our budget. Just some of our return on investment. We definitely want to make sure we continue to provide the supports for our schools. We want to make sure that we recruit and retain a diverse quality workforce, and we want to continue to increase the number of clinical students placed in RPS. Definitely, we're looking at increasing the number of pathway opportunities for staff to earn licensure. That's going to be very important for us as we're looking to staff a diverse staff across RPS and increase in RPS graduates applying for the RU pathway programs. And that is it for the small, powerful equity team. Thank you.
Mrs. McCulloch.
The subs through Kelly Services for LEAP, when you said every other year, do we not start a new cohort every year, and so there would always be somebody in that, a group in that first, whatever year the clinicals are in, the second year?
No. So I think how it works, just the group that left off, they didn't need it. We didn't use it this year. So we are going to use it the year after next. So we did not use the services for subs this year when they did clinicals, but we're going to use it in 25. We're projected to use it. For some reason, we did not have to use them for subs this year at all. But we do know we're going to use them when they do their clinicals and student teach. I think it was the first year that we did it, and they were not utilized. We did not utilize the subs for this year's cohort or leap.
But we always have, it's a 2-year, 18-month program, is it?
Yep.
We changed it to 24 months, so there will be a gap.
Mm-hmm.
The next cohort will be 24 months.
But we have 2 running at the same time, one in the first year, one in the second?
One.
We'll have one done by the time the second cohort starts, and that second cohort will be 24 months, so there'll be a gap.
Okay. I'm not asking my question.
Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. This is a really unusual question for a board member who's typically sensitive about budget, but this feels like a particular department where I would not have expected a decrease. I understand about the principal subs, but I guess I was still surprised to see a drop of some substance. I guess I would ask, is there capacity that you would like to build if there were something of an increase?
Yes, definitely we're working with Dr. Jarrett to increase that, because we did realize that we were trying to do things that will require a little bit more of us, and so the need is there. I think what Dr. Jarrett did a great job of pulsing how we would be utilized in different atmospheres, and when we're going out there and we partner with one college, but then we're asking 4 and 5 or saying, hey, look, can we do the same thing? We then begin to recognize we do have to look a little more strategic in how we do that. We've kind of paused some initiatives because we want to do things the right way and make sure that we fully do right by one university so we can replicate a model. So it's also a time that we're learning how to do it the right way and taking our time. And so it is an opportunity for us to do a better job of looking at ways to increase how we do things, but we don't want to waste money either. We looked at a consultant company that we had, and we just wanted to make sure that everything we did, we can show data that our board and our district can utilize to say that we're doing the right thing. So we did remove a consultant agency that was probably spending a lot more on our budget there than we probably needed to spend. So we re-looked at that, and we looked at an agency that's going to provide data that is important. I know you talked about, Mr. Siegel, attendance is everything. So this consultancy is going to come in and make sure that our students don't come and sit down and shut up, but stand up and show out because they're happy to be in our school district.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Reed.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is a review of the 2012-2022 Facilities Master Plan. I will now turn the meeting over to Michael Phillips, Chief Operating Officer.
Good evening. Tonight I wanted to take a look back at our last facilities master plan that we completed in 2022 and highlight some initiatives that we completed along the way that will provide key information for a new master plan. So when we started the plan in 2012, we had 55 buildings totaling 4.8 million square feet and 785 acres. In 2022, when we completed the plan, we ended with 44 buildings totaling 44.9 million square feet and 775 acres. We had some much needed investment that needed to happen. So we invested $47.8 million on cafeteria, gymnasium, and classroom additions at 18 schools. We invested $42 million on field houses and gymnasium upgrades at East, Auburn, Jefferson, and Guilford. And we invested $38.2 million in 2 new classroom buildings, Cherry Valley, which opened in 2018, and Constance Lane that opened in 2019. We also invested in deferred maintenance. We invested $30.8 million in mechanical, electrical, and HVAC upgrades at 25 schools, $19.7 million in painting and flooring in 34 schools, $16.5 million in window replacements at 21 schools, $16.2 million in building restoration and tuck pointing at approximately 20 schools, and then we spent $3.1 million in demolition of 9 buildings. We had several different funding sources that helped pave the way for this master plan. We had $139 million in general obligation bonds, a $50 million reserve pledge, and $18 million in health life safety bonds. We had $9 million in CPPRT, which Greg talked a little bit about tonight. An additional $25 million in CPPRT leveraged qualified school construction bond. And lastly, $9 million in our annual health, life safety, and operation and maintenance funds. During the plan, we had budgeted $279 million to complete all the work. In the end, in 2022, the plan was completed for $285 million, approximately $6 million over budget, or 2%. In 2020, the district hired Accruent, an architectural and engineering firm specializing in facilities condition assessments, to complete a comprehensive review of all of our facilities. This included looking at components in mechanical, electrical, roofing, and building envelope, just to name a few. Accruent assessed 46 assets, which included 44 buildings and 2 stadiums, totaling 4.9 million square feet, with a total replacement value of $1.7 billion. Our 5-year facilities index cost, estimated cost, is $529 million. Our average asset age or building age is 50 years. Our 5-year facilities condition index ranges from 0.00 to 0.51. So our newest, as you can imagine, our 2 new elementary schools, and then our oldest building. And then our 5-year average FCI is 0.32, where we fall within the fair range. The FCI is calculated by dividing the 5-year system and renewal cost by the assessed asset current replacement value. The lower an asset's FCI value, the better the building's overall condition is assumed to be. So taking a look at our assessment results, we have our 2 new buildings plus our stadiums that fall within the 0.00 to 0.10 range. 3 buildings that fall within the 0.11 to 0.20 range. The vast majority of our buildings, which 29, fall within our fair range, 0.21 to 0.40. And then lastly, we have 10 buildings that fall within the 0.41 to 0.60 range. In 2019, we hired RSP and Associates to complete a building utilization analysis.
This is a method to identify the number of learners that can be reasonably accommodated at each school building by assessing 3 areas. Physical, which includes building space, classroom size, and support space. Operational, which is your utilization rate, staffing class size range, and building schedule. And lastly, programmatic, which is your core educational programs, specialty programs, and instructional models. From that assessment, we identified that overall the district has our functional capacity is adequate, but we also realized that we identified 12 buildings that have utilization above 85%. 6 elementary schools, which includes Cherry Valley, Riverdale, Spring Creek, Welsh, and Whitehead. 3 middle schools, Eisenhower, Flynn, and Risa, and 3 high schools, East, Guilford, and Jefferson. This graph just shows us that our overall K through 12 enrollment capacity is 29,171 students. In this graph, we are seeing our latest projected enrollment from the 23-24 school year to the 27-28 school year. And as you can see, we're seeing a decrease from 24,811 students to 24,055. So over the next 5 years, we're projecting an overall decrease of 756 students, 90 within elementary schools, 70 in our middle schools, and 500, our biggest portion, 596 in our high schools. We're projecting our K through 8 schools to be stable. One of our major goals with our ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER dollars was extending time by improving our facilities through HVAC upgrades and replacement and adding air conditioning to 100% of our classrooms. In January, Dr. Brown came and we provided an update of where we were at. I just wanted to, once again, provide the board with our current project schedule. As everybody knows, last summer we started our projects at 6 schools. Those schools will continue this summer, and we're adding 10 additional schools. So we'll have 16 schools that will be under construction with HVAC upgrades this coming summer. We thought it'd be interesting to kind of break this down by quadrant to see what we were spending in each quadrant. So as you can see in our southwest quadrant, we're spending a total of $61 million. Out of the southwest quadrant, 6 of these schools already have 100% air conditioning. But as you can see, East, Lincoln, and Washington, some of our oldest buildings, are our highest cost to add air conditioning to. In the southeast quadrant, we have 2 out of the 10 schools that are currently air conditioned. We're projecting a spend of $36.2 million in the southeast quadrant, $22.2 million in the northwest quadrant, and lastly, $40.4 million in the northeast quadrant. We are currently tracking an all-in budget of $160,682,000. As you recall, our budget was $157 million. When we first started this, with our first initial projects, we were coming in significantly over budget for a number of different reasons. We went back and did some value engineering with our contractors and our engineers, and if you recall, we pulled out about $7 million for that value engineering. We're tracking that we have not spent any additional contingencies in these projects. Now, we still have to finish those this summer, but we are currently projecting to return about $5 million of that $7 million of contingency, bringing our budget back in line. In March, Dr. Brown and I will be returning to the Committee of the Whole to discuss a new facilities master plan, talking about process, potential funding sources, and timing. So this was just to kind of lay the groundwork, how we did in our last facilities master plan prior to engaging in a new discussion. Any questions?
Ms. McCulloch?
What is OSC? Is that the
Operations Support Center.
Support Center.
Yeah.
Support Center, that's what I thought. And are our field houses air conditioned?
They are not.
And they will not be, correct?
They are not.
Making
Correct.
sure that that is not going to happen. And then could you, did anybody say why the high school number, was it 596 over 5 years was the drop in students?
Yeah, so we're looking at the high schools. I think that's where the largest portion of enrollment is right now. That's at the high school level. I can dive in. We will be back in March to provide our annual enrollment analysis, Ms. McCulloch, so I will have those answers.
I just thought there might have been some information on that when they did that analysis, so, okay, thank you.
Oh, Mr. Siegel.
It's all right. This is probably more for the board members who were here when the original facilities master plan was launched. It just struck me as interesting that our facilities condition index put collectively our buildings exactly at the halfway point of fair. So just right exactly in the middle. When this facilities master plan was launched 10, 11 years ago, was there that kind of an outcome that you were hoping for? I won't even get into the square footage conversation with you, but as far as the overall condition of the district's buildings, is that kind of what the aim was to get collectively the buildings up to this average condition?
Unfortunately, we don't have apples to apples comparisons with the analysis that was done. So
understood.
But I think in general, there was a bit of a trade-off in terms of in prioritizing remodeling existing schools. You're not going to see the massive gains. I do think we made really significant improvements from where we were by any measure to where we are. The way you'll get the greatest gains on this kind of a measure is to build more new schools, because new schools are automatically the lowest number. You'll notice the brand new schools are all, have no maintenance needs. And even the schools that we invested in some cases $10, $11, $12 million in still have some needs, and that's the nature of remodeling versus a new school. It also reflects the priorities that were made to make expanded footprint investments in getting rid of gym and cafetoriums, adding field houses, et cetera. We could have pushed more dollars into deferred maintenance had we not done that as well. So I think it really reflects the collective decisions that were made over multiple years of community conversations. I think those two determinants probably impacted the ability to maximize deferred maintenance. Could have been achieved one of those two ways: more new schools or more emphasis on maintenance at the expense of some expanded space that we added.
So I'm not expressing any disappointment, really. I mean, anything other than I'm glad that this facilities master plan came to fruition and that it did so close to budget. I mean, shooting at something that's 10 years away and coming within 2%, I think, is spectacular. But I guess it's a question I would ask when we're looking at a new facilities master plan. Is that a worthwhile metric to shoot for, to say the next time we're done with this facilities master plan, we want our overall district condition to be this? Because I think that ends up giving a very digestible outcome to people, because we're going to ask them to pay for it. And I'm just wondering if 10 years ago or 12 years ago, when we put this out for a referendum to raise money, if saying we're going to land, we're going to bring all of our buildings up to this middle of the spectrum, how that would have played. And I just think it's an interesting metric to shoot for.
So, Mr. Siegel, I'm sorry, Mr. Rollins.
So no, there wasn't a metric like that, and I take these facilities condition assessments with a grain of salt because, they're benchmarking against, as Dr. Jarrett said, brand new buildings, and not everybody has brand new buildings. In fact, most people don't have brand new buildings, and so when we did the facilities plan at the beginning, all I can tell you is that everybody understood that the buildings, almost all the buildings, other than the ones that had been built in the 90s, had really high needs. And the thing that I can remember telling people, because I visited most of the schools as part of that facilities plan, you couldn't walk into a classroom without seeing duct tape. You couldn't walk into a classroom without seeing extension cords. And so we knew that we had needs. We wanted to make sure that we touched every building in the district. We knew we weren't going to have the money to turn every school into a brand new school. So we went through a really long and intensive and actually multi-layered process to get community input as to what our priorities should be. And I was disappointed we couldn't do more. I was going to chide Mr. Phillips for in his one little icon using a pipe, because I know for sure, because I was there, that we pulled most of the plumbing out of that plan because it was the only way to get the plan to fit the dollars. So most of our schools didn't get the plumbing work that I was hoping that they would get. We pulled more electrical work out of that plan than I
think that was an airflow pipe, Mr. Rollins. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Our schools all have really old plumbing. A lot of them do. There was less electrical work done, I found out after the fact, than I had thought. So we still have electrical work to do. So, some of that, I'm hoping some of that can be done with the HVAC upgrades with the schools that are, where we're using the ARP-ESSER funds, but
correct, Mr. Rollins, and that was the point I was going to make, is with our ESSER 2 and ARP-ESSER funds, we are going to put a dent in this index because we are replacing old unit ventilators, old radiator heating elements, rooftop units with these ARP-ESSER dollars. I also want to point out that throughout when we've ended, we've continued to invest in our buildings. As you know, you've all approved a number of roof replacements. Those will put dents in this facilities condition assessment. So we're working in the right direction, that's for sure.
But I'll also say when we started doing, and I think one of the first schools that we did was Johnson, where we did one of the wings, and you walked in, and the difference between the part that had been worked on and the part that hadn't been worked on, it was just phenomenal, night and day. And so, we definitely made an improvement. Did we hit some target on a facilities, condition index? No.
And it's fine that we didn't, and because we may not have even known that such a metric existed, but now we do, and it seems just like that could be a useful target to aim at.
That was what I wanted to add. Is I think what's really nice is going in on the front end, we're going to have a consistent metric now. We absolutely had different studies that showed that. I think perhaps we used letter grades at one point. Our previous chief of operations did endeavor to do multiple studies, but nothing to the level of this conditions assessment. And I do really wish we had a record of where we were. I suspect, as Mr. Rollins alluded, it would show we've made dramatic improvement. And the good news about any future plan that the board endeavors to take on, we will have a very clear baseline of where we're starting.
Did anybody have any other questions for Mr. Phillips? Nope, I guess he's already left.
Running, yes.
Okay, well, that takes us to the preview of consent items. The following items will be presented on the consent agenda for the February 14th, 2023 board meeting. A, student attendance boundary realignment. Conklin Elementary School has been identified as a school site that will host the new International Baccalaureate program. Surrounding school attendance boundaries will absorb what had been the Conklin Elementary attendance boundary. I will now turn over the meeting to Rob Schwartz, RSP Associates, to present the recommended boundary changes. Is he here?
Mr. Schwartz is on Zoom. He is zoomed in, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Schwartz, you've got the wall. can't hear you. Are you on mute? We can't hear you.
Test.
Now we can hear you.
I enjoy this. All right, back. Technology, when it works. All right, thank you this evening to give me some time to talk about this exciting time with the Conklin IB program and what that may mean for that whole Northwest quadrant. So as I move through this, I was looking at when we first started working in your district, and it was 2013-14. So a lot of work that we've done in your district, from 2 other boundary plans for your elementary, your secondary. So this is just a natural segue into some of the cool things about having this IB program up on the Northwest quadrant. So you read some of the reasoning of why we're doing this. Conklin's going to launch as an IB in 23-24, and there's going to be students that can apply for enrollment through a lottery system, so there's no attendance area needed. There will be a Spanish component, and so there will be TBE classrooms, so transitional bilingual education classrooms in this facility. So our task was to create some boundaries where we would relocate students that would not be in the IB program to McIntosh, Welsh, and Westview. And so we had some assumptions when we got to the numbers that we had to make. When you're creating a new school, a new program, we're indicating that there will be 70% of existing Conklin students will elect to stay at the Conklin IB program. So that means if there's less that go to Conklin, there's more at these 3 other buildings. So keep that in mind when you look at the data. We also have the TBE, special programming, and self-contained 22-23 students. They're redistributed to their respective attending schools based on those program choices. And so that's how we started to relate this to the number of kids that potentially could be attending each of these 4 buildings. So some of our objectives. So obviously Conklin is the IB school for the Northwest quadrants. We're creating new attendance areas for McIntosh, Westview, and Welsh Elementary. We targeted a utilization of the buildings at 85%, and we had McIntosh enrollments that it would be below 450 because of their special programming and how that programming works in each of the core classrooms. We're also increasing enrollment at Westview School to provide an equitable experience for the other 2 schools. We also considered improvements to the transportation system, so how you would move around to each of these buildings. What I think was really unique in this process is when we started out early on, we met with the administration and we met with the building principals to talk through some of the challenges that may be there geographically, just different essences of what was happening in the community to make sure that as we establish new boundaries, these could be a long-lasting boundary, much like when the last time we did these boundary changes. So some things that we also considered is that McIntosh, with that special programming, really their operational capacity is closer to 483, and I already explained why that is. And then with the IB program at Conklin, there's a plan that we have for the next 2 school years. Again, working with administration on this. So in 23-24, there would be 3 strings of K4 grades and 2 strings of 5th grade, and each grade will have at least 1 bilingual. In 24-25, the difference is because we don't yet have a middle school IB program. We want to have 2 classrooms that would be available for 6th grade. One would be monolingual and one would be bilingual. A lot of moving parts in this. The boundary that we are recommending to you will come up here in a moment, but here's our current boundary that shows the 4 buildings. So kind of the peachy color, that's Conklin Elementary. To the right of that, the darker purple is Westview, and then right below that is Welsh Elementary, which is blue color, and then to its left or the west is the pink, that's McIntosh. So that's our current boundaries. This was the current area that we were looking at. How can we redistribute the students that potentially would not be in the IB program? How does that then impact each of these 3 attendance areas? Here's the enrollment forecast of what we have for each of the buildings. This will mean more for you all when the final report is presented to you at a future board meeting. We're also showing by grade projections for the current boundaries, and this is important for 23-24. Let's get into the recommended option. All right, so we're going from 4 buildings to 3 buildings that have physical attendance areas. And so when we look at this map, the darker purple is the new boundary that we're establishing. For Westview. The blue area below is for Welsh, and then the pink area is McIntosh. And so what we tried to look through here is to make sure that the boundaries followed some of the transportation network and some of the just nuances of how people walk to the buildings or maybe not walking to the buildings. And so we've categorized some of the areas on the map, and I hope you can read this, or if you have a paper copy. So area 1, areas of Conklin that changed to Westview. Basically, it's the area east of Kilbourne Avenue and north of Sharon Road that was in Conklin. That's now in Westview. That's why that's all purple. Area 2, which is just there to the south of Kilbourne Avenue, we have that area going to McIntosh. Area 3, which is denoted as in a red outline, that's areas west of Rockton Avenue that were in Welsh, they're now in McIntosh. Area 4, which is the pink, that's basically defined as the area east of Main Street, extending south of Auburn Road that was in Westview, is now in Welsh. And then 5, the point of what's happening in this recommended option, Conklin is the IB program. What that looks like with the numbers in this recommended option is on the top, we show what the projections are by building, where we've taken into account that 70% participation rates and some of the special programming, the TBE, how do those students flow through year in and year out. What's important on that table is when we look at the capacity percentage, as we look at 27-28, you can see there's a range in these buildings from Conklin being a low of 71.1 to Welsh being at the high of 87.5. Remember, I said our target, we were trying to get at 85%. If you go back to the study that Michael was talking about earlier that we did for your district, some of these buildings, it's fine for them to get to 87, 90%, but we start to run into potential stresses of class sizes and the number of spaces they need. So this fits within the guidelines of what we outlined back in 2019 and what that means for the programming in these buildings. The bottom table, we wanted to focus on next year because of this moving part, how many kids are in each of these grades. And so we've listed off each of these 4 buildings. You can see the number of students by grade, the total K-5 students there. will equal what you see up in the table above for the 23-24 school year. So again, trying to establish, can we actually have these boundaries with the spaces that will be outlined for that programming in each of these buildings? So then this next page gives you a comparison of, on the left-hand side, the current boundaries, and then the map on the right shows what the recommended boundary is to take into account everything that we've been trying to achieve with these objectives. And that's why on this page on the right-hand side, the objectives that we were looking to achieve, we've established new attendance areas for McIntosh, Westview, and Welsh. We've targeted that utilization of 85% in each of these buildings, and we've made some improvements to the transportation system, which is something that's been needed to minimize some of those challenges that you've been experiencing in this quadrants. Next step, so tonight you're receiving the recommendation. On the 14th, it would be an action item. And the implementation of the IB program begins in 23-24. And next steps really are that continued communication to the Northwest quadrants to provide them this really incredible opportunity for the IB program. And if not going to that building, where those students potentially would attend based on this recommended option. I will now yield back to the board questions, comments to what I've covered with you this evening.
Well, I've got a question, which is the 70% assumption. Do we have any sort of an initial expression of interest, or have we asked people? Like, what are we basing that 70% on?
I think that's very conservative. We, just after the first round of Conklin students and families, we were sitting at 234 already, and that is without drawing from any of the other schools that we would prioritize in the Northwest or expanding it beyond the Northwest. So I think it's a very, very good to be conservative here, but a conservative assumption based on how well enrollment seems to be going thus far.
So we have started enrollment, and we think about 70% of the kids at Conklin will stay at Conklin?
I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I know that Sarah, the principal, shared the number, and they were at 234 already just with Conklin students, and we're in the process now of having a series of meetings at McIntosh and Westview and Welsh. I suspect we will add a number of students there as well.
Well, but he's saying that all of his numbers are based on the assumption that 70% of the Conklin students will stay in Conklin. So you're at 273 out of?
We're at 234.
234 out of 343. I mean, what number does that give us? 3. Doing that wrong.
We're about 68%.
All right. Yep. So you're pretty close then. Okay.
And we're in pretty good shape there. And again, that's largely been addressed with the Conklin families. Now we're moving on to the Welsh, Westview, and McIntosh families.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Ms. Pearson?
I just, for clarity, should we have gotten this info? Should this? How do I want to word this? Is this information that we're getting now could have been shared prior to the IB, prior to voting for the IB?
When did you vote for the IB? And then I can maybe answer the question on our end if that was possible.
I think that's for the administration. Yes, we could have. I think we probably could have shared proposals for how the boundaries would be impacted. We shared with the board that these are the 4 boundaries that would be impacted, but we did wait until the board approved the plan before hiring the demographer to do the work. We certainly could have done the work on the front end, and as we look at future IB or special program sites, that's certainly something we can take a recommendation from the board, whether the order of operation should be flipped. But I think the idea was we wanted to make sure the board approved it before we went forward with making the changes. But we certainly could do it the other way as well.
That is just a little concerning that we get this, the boundary, the details of the boundary, even if it was a possibility, because then it raised other questions. How equitable is IB? What is it about IB that is equitable?
Well, the way we approached IB is that first we are going to the students in the serving school, Conklin, and giving them first choice, and then we are addressing all of the students in the quadrant that are impacted equally. So McIntosh, Welsh, and Westview. We are fairly confident that we will not have a problem with running out of room with the program, but every single parent and family that is in the current quadrant will have the opportunity to be in the IB program. And so I think at this point, all of our projections thus far are showing that there's equitable access to this program for students in the Northwest Quadrant.
Okay, so I understand the equality piece in terms of everyone being involved, but so maybe for the sake of a community understanding, the lottery system is the lottery system equitable?
I guess there is no lottery system. Every student who wants to in the Northwest Quadrant can join the program. At this point, we have not had to have a lottery.
Okay, so let me clarify. How well have this been explained to every parent of the students that will have the opportunity to attend?
We are meeting with every single, every child in every school is having access to this program, and they're conducting multiple meetings at every single school. And I would be happy to follow up with a report on that full schedule in this week's update if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other lights on. Thank you. I can't remember his name. Mr. Schwartz. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. And I guess that completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Ms. Stanford, I'm going to give the floor to you for the Performance and Monitoring Committee report.
Okay, this evening we'll have one presentation from our partners at Alignment Rockford's Ready to Learn team. From Executive Director Emily Klonecke, Heidi Detman will join her to share the latest data from the Early Development Instrument and how the data will be used in our community.
Good evening. Thank you so much, and thank you for staying up late with us. This is going to be the best part of your night, I'm sure. Yeah, so thank you very much. You're welcome. We are here to talk to you about our brand new Wave 2 EDI data and the Ready to Learn work that we are doing in the community of Rockford around early childhood. Our community's future relies on the success of its youth. The healthiest communities of the world are those in which every person is able to meet his or her potential. Imagine a Rockford that asks first about its children. The health and well-being of a community's children is a clear indication of its current and future strength. You won't be surprised to find out that communities around the world who think first about their children foster healthy families, have strong support systems, healthy economies, and are safe and healthy places to live and work. Brains are built from the bottom up. The basic architecture of the brain is constructed through an ongoing process that begins before birth and continues into adulthood. Simple neural connections form first, followed by more complex circuits, which scaffold, and on these make the the connections that we run our information. Brain architecture is comprised of billions of connections between individual neurons across different areas of the brain. These connections enable lightning-fast communication among neurons that specialize in certain kinds of brain functions. The early years are the most critical time for establishing these connections. In the first few years of life, more than 1 million new neural connections form every second. While new connections form throughout life, this is the most critical time. The interaction of genes and experience shape the developing brain. Although genes provide the blueprint for the formation of brain circuits, these circuits are reinforced by repeated use. A major ingredient in this developmental process is the interaction between children and their parents and other caregivers. Scientists in the field call this the serve and return interaction, where a child engages with the adult and the adult responds, or vice versa. In the absence of such responsive caregiving, or if responses are unreliable or inappropriate, the brain's architecture does not form as expected, which can lead to disparities in learning and behavior. Ultimately, genes and experience work together to construct brain architecture. Every experience a child has informs the development of his or her brain. Imagine the brain as a series of paths over which information must travel for learning to occur. A brain with a smooth, open, well-traveled path will easily transfer and organize information. A strong infrastructure allows for the building and refining of more paths and connections. A brain with paths that are crowded and with overgrowth or have hardly been used require extra work just to transfer and organize that information. Creating connections and refinements will be harder and more difficult. What is the best way to help young children to build a great neurological infrastructure that is ready to learn when they enter school? The number and frequency of exposures to developmentally healthy experience and the stimuli are what determine the kind of paths that are created. To be ready to learn when a child enters school, he or she needs ongoing, healthy, repeated stimulus and experiences starting at birth. Who is going to provide these services and experiences, and how do we reach those people? In thinking about early childhood work, we center around 3 important questions. 1, what skills or experiences would a well-prepared and healthy kindergarten student arrive with on the first day of school? 2, who will provide access to those skills and experience? Their parents and primary caregivers. What do they need in order to support that growth and learning for their young child? And 3, what kinds of resources and supports need to be in place in a community to help families provide healthy experiences and ensure that every child is ready for kindergarten? Who is responsible for these children to be ready to learn? By the time a child enters kindergarten around age 5, an important window of development is already closing, and children unequipped with the developmental skills needed to succeed start at a disadvantage and face challenges that will continue and compound over their academic life. Parents and primary caregivers are a child's first teacher. As a community and as educators, we must acknowledge and respond to the needs that parents have and support them with resources in order to provide the best developmental opportunities they can. Education is not only the job of our school district. For our youngest community members, our future generation, it is the responsibility of the village. Rockford is responding. Rockford Public School District is responding. The Ready to Learn movement is a community initiative organized and coordinated by Alignment Rockford in partnership with RPS 205 and other community organizations, service providers, and institutions in the Rockford area that are working together to improve the environment and experience of raising young children in Rockford. Because there is a gap in coordinated services for families of young children, communities have begun forming collective coalitions to coordinate efforts in providing resources and wrapping support around the families of young children. Our work began in 2019 when it became clear that to intervene in the problematic third grade IAR reading and math scores, we needed to go upstream and focus on early childhood. The community was behind this idea, but we lacked a rich common data set to understand the early childhood landscape, the gaps and opportunities of our community, and later to measure the progress of any work that we would do. So in 2019, we signed with Erickson Institute and brought the first wave of the early development instrument to Rockford. From the work that came from that survey, we had our Ready to Learn team form, and they were supported by grant funding from the Community Foundation of Northern Illinois, and the Illinois Action for Children. Our leadership formed action teams, A-teams, to drive our work, and we launched into the next 3 years of a 3-tiered implementation strategy for providing those resources and supports to families in Rockford. Just as COVID shut everybody down for 1 year. Despite the pandemic, we continued to work on and implement the saturation, and we have made headway in many fronts, including partnerships and support for families throughout the community. This school year, we launched the second wave of the EDI, working this time with UCLA, and the results of this survey will guide our next 3 years of work in Ready to Learn. So now I'm going to hand it over to Heidi, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the findings in the 2022 EDI data.
Thank you. For those of you who have been with us for quite some time, not just this evening, but over the last several years, you might remember that we did slip a couple little jokes in, make sure everybody stays fresh. You might remember that we had a gallery walk where we laid out a bunch of colorful maps in the room, and we walked through and we asked you to sort of focus on a neighborhood. I'm going to do a similar exercise here, but I'm also going to rewind us a little bit because so many of you are new and haven't experienced the EDI or Early Development Instrument before. So for some of you, this will be repeat information, and for others, it's brand new, but I wanted to bring us all around a common set of information. So I'm going to walk you through what the EDI is, and then why it matters for our community and what we're doing with it. This board invested $200,000 in the initial partnership with the Erickson Institute, and that mattered an awful lot. And you'll see in the later slides the return on your investment in dollars that went straight into our community. The second EDI wave was less expensive, but you invested $70,000 in that wave. So our goal here tonight in this report is to show you sort of the beginnings of the return of investment on that second wave of data and where we're going from here. So I am going to play a video. It is longer than 30 seconds, but it gives you sort of a quick and dirty, what is the EDI and how do communities use it? Thank you, Connor.
A child's early years of life are incredibly important. What happens during the first 5 years has lifelong effects. That's because the brain develops rapidly during these years and changes based on a child's experiences. If children receive good quality stimulation, support, and nurturance during these years, the brain will develop in healthy ways, giving children a strong foundation for future success. Sadly, not all children have positive experiences during these crucial years and lack the stimulation, support, and nurturance needed for the brain to develop in the healthiest way possible. That means there are more challenges for these children as they grow. Many later problems, including school failure, antisocial behavior, teen pregnancy, obesity, high blood pressure, depression, coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, premature aging, and memory loss, can be traced back to early childhood. But if we help children and families early on, we can avoid many of these negative outcomes thanks to the brain's ability to easily change and adapt at this stage. something that becomes much harder as we age. Investing resources during this unique window of opportunity provides the best return on investment, with governments receiving between $4 and $8 back in benefits for every $1 spent on early childhood programs. That is why knowing how our young children are doing is so vital for their future well-being. If we don't know how children are doing, we can't identify any problems, we can't effectively help them, and we won't know if things are getting better or worse. To stay informed about children's early development, communities across Canada and around the world are using the Early Development Instrument, or EDI for short. The EDI is a teacher-completed questionnaire developed by Drs. Dan Offord and Magdalena Janis at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. The EDI measures kindergarten children's ability to meet age-appropriate and developmental expectations across 5 general areas: physical health and well-being, emotional maturity, social competence, language and cognitive development, and communication skills and general knowledge. Teachers are best suited to complete the EDI because they know the range of appropriate child behaviors and skills within a school setting. And by the time they complete the EDI in the second half of the school year, they have had plenty of opportunity to see how each child learns, plays, and interacts with other children. After teachers complete the EDI on each individual child in their class, the results are grouped together to give a snapshot of how children are doing across schools, neighborhoods, cities, or even provinces and countries. Children who fall below the standardized EDI cutoff scores are referred to as vulnerable. Research shows that these children are more likely to experience poorer outcomes later in life, academically, emotionally, and in their relationships with peers. Focusing on strengthening the areas in which children are vulnerable allows schools, communities, and governments to make decisions on how to best support early development. Schools may be good at recognizing individual children who struggle, but without knowing the major areas of strength and weakness in the school and community, there can be no action to help all children. Most of the children vulnerable on the EDI do not have any health problems and will not be helped through any other means. Without knowing how all children are developing, schools and communities are left guessing. This is what makes EDI data so important. In many places, collecting EDI data is the first step toward mobilizing communities and engaging those who aren't usually involved in promoting the development of young children. By getting a glimpse of the development and well-being of young children through the EDI, people can be inspired to do something to improve the lives of our young children and help shape a better future in their own communities and beyond.
So we are not the only community that does this. This map shows all of the communities across the United States that are EDI communities, and they're supported with by UCLA, who holds, the National Repository of the data. So it originated in Canada. UCLA brought it to the United States, and they are sort of the spearhead on the project currently. You learned in the video about the EDI. Really, there are 3 reasons that we give it. It assesses the strengths and weaknesses of groups of students, not individual students. It reports on populations of children in different communities, and it provides a kindergarten benchmark for monitoring development. The video mentioned 5 domains. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about those domains because I'm going to show you the maps of our city with our neighborhoods in just a moment. The first is physical health and well-being. This map is going to stand out to you, but it likely won't surprise you in our post-pandemic world. Physical health and well-being is that children are healthy, they're independent, and they're rested each day. Social competence, this is measuring how children play and get along with others, how they share, and how they show self-confidence, That is slightly different than emotional maturity. This measure looks at how children can concentrate on tasks, how they help others, they show patience, and are not often aggressive or angry. Sometimes we get surprised at the emotional maturity levels of some of our students, but when you dig a little deeper and you start asking questions of the adults who are closest to them, you can see that when they have the opportunity to lead and take care of others, they always rise to the challenge. Language and cognitive development will be a map that jumps out to you. Again, it doesn't surprise any of us in our sort of post-pandemic world, through pandemic world. This is that children are interested in reading and writing. To be interested, you need to be exposed to reading and writing, and many of our students were not as exposed to rich experiences with books and print during the pandemic, that they can count, they can recognize numbers and shapes. These are basic academic skills. And then communication skills and general knowledge, that they can tell a story, they can communicate with adults and with other children. So these 5 domains together give us a holistic view of students and not just their academic measures on decoding words, for example. The video also mentioned vulnerability. Vulnerability is defined as the bottom 10%, and when students are identified as vulnerable, it means that without intervention, we know they're going to continue to be at risk throughout their lives. There are really 3 ways that we define the breakdowns of students. Those that are under the 10th percentile are vulnerable, between 10 and 25 are at risk. So that means they're not vulnerable, but we need to be aware of this group of students. And then those that are on track, 25 to 100. There are 2 things that we do with the EDI data. We look back and we look forward, bless you. We look back to determine what are the kinds of early experiences that matter most to our young children, and how can we make sure that all families have opportunities to for rich early experiences in their neighborhoods. We also do it to predict their future success in schools and what kinds of supports we need to wrap around them as they become school-age children. Here's a quick summary of the students. These are just the facts, okay? We had lots of classrooms. We welcomed Harlem School District in with us. We welcomed Spectrum in with us as well. We had more than 2,000 student records come into this, and I'm really, really proud of our kindergarten teachers. We had 100% of our children counted in this kindergarten census, and they did it after hours. We were unable to provide subs last spring because of our staffing shortage, so each of them received a stipend and each of them committed to do the work after hours. We monitored record completion every single week. There was a champion in every school. They communicated with me their progress, and up until the last moment, we were 8 children short, and that teacher got it done before they cut it off. So I'm really, really proud of the efforts, especially of the RPS teachers. Here's the overall results of the survey. It looks a little bit small. It's also included in the slides on board docs. Essentially, what you can see is Rockford is the top line, and then the national average is the second line in each of those domains. So with a quick snapshot, we can see that in physical health and well-being, we have slightly more children who are vulnerable and significantly more children who are at risk in physical health and well-being. Social competence, we are very close to the national norm here in social competence. Emotional maturity, we're slightly above the national average. Language and cognitive development is alarming. This is where you see some of our greatest vulnerabilities, neighborhood by neighborhood, and you'll see that on the map here in a moment. Communication skills and general knowledge, again, kind of within a few points of the national average. And then the distribution across all of the developmental domains, you can see that we are slightly more vulnerable and at risk than the national norm as a community. We added schools. I mentioned this already. We partnered with Harlem. I'm so excited that they're on board with us because it gives us a greater snapshot of our entire county, which is very helpful. And then importantly, I'm going to walk you through the NNEI. That is the national, just another acronym. That is another measure. It's the National Neighborhood Equity Index. And that is a composite map that measures 11 indicators of equity challenges, and I'm going to tell you what those are right now. They're listed here for you. I won't read out all of them off, but you can see they range from strengths to vulnerabilities. Each of these 11 indicators is captured in the census, and it's mapped by census tract. That gives us just an overall view of the vulnerability of the neighborhood, not the child. And I'll walk you through how UCLA uses the NNEI to compare that to children's vulnerability. And we can see where children are flourishing despite a high equity index, or where children are struggling despite very few challenges in the neighborhood. And I'll show you that map here in just a moment. The NNEI, we believe, is a very insightful data point to help us align our community resources around lifting up the entire neighborhood. The kindergarten child is the barometer for the health of the overall family. When we look at this map, I'll repeat this when we get to the map, but when we look at the map, that dark red in the top left corner means that there were very few indicators of vulnerability in the NNEI, but there were a high percentage of children who were measured as vulnerable. So even though the neighborhood didn't maybe suggest that there might be children who are struggling, our EDI says they are. If you are dark blue, that means that we had high equity index, high number of, pardon me, it's getting late, a high number of indicators on the NNEI, but children were performing better than we might have predicted. And I'll walk you through that here in just a moment. As we look at the maps, I want to also kind of explain this as like a game of chutes and ladders. Those things that are assets are things that help children move forward, and those things that are struggles are the chutes that bring them back down. So access to safe parks and green spaces, great things. They help children grow. Family stress about income is a chute. Inadequate access to health care is another chute, but access to affordable housing is a ladder. So I'll be walking you through just the maps, but when we analyze this data with Alignment Rockford, with our Ready to Learn teams, we're looking at all of the assets in a neighborhood as well. You have a link in your slide deck. This is live for you. It will take you right to the interactive maps where you can look at all of the indicators. You can layer on the assets. You can layer on other data points such as domestic violence data by neighborhood, family income, etc. The world is your oyster on this interactive map. We will not be going through all of that tonight. My goal tonight is to give you a snapshot of what the data has said and let you know what our next steps are. I'm going to walk you through the maps at this point. This first map is an overall snapshot of the percentage of children vulnerable in one or more domains. The blue dot in the middle is where we are right now. That's the central office. The red lines are the school district boundaries, both RPS and Harlem. So you can, I would suggest that as I flip through the maps, right now, find one area of the city that holds meaning for you. It could be the area where you live or the subdistrict you represent. It could be an area where you do a lot of your work. But for right now, just focus your eye on one part of our city that holds some sort of meaning for you. The darker the green, the greater the percentage of students who are vulnerable in one or more domains. The lighter the green, the less percentage. So you can see already there's some patterns emerging, okay? The next map is only children who were vulnerable in physical health and well-being. This map might cause us to ask some questions such as, are there open, safe green spaces in all of the darkest green areas? That's a great question to ask. On the interactive map, you can layer on the assets and you can see that. So keep your eyes sort of trained to that section of town that means the most to you. You can see that we have some very light green and we also have some very dark green. The next is our percent of children who are vulnerable in social competence. And again, these are aligned to neighborhoods as defined by the U.S. Census. They are not aligned to school feeder patterns. This is about aligning community resources at the neighborhood level to lift up the entire family and provide rich experiences to all children. So this is social competence. We might be asking about the availability of high-quality childcare. We might be asking about the availability of high-quality community center programming. The next map is percent vulnerable in emotional maturity. And that looks a little bit different than social competence. The next map is the one that likely will stand out the most, which is the percent vulnerable in language and cognitive development. For context, our public preschool program was under-enrolled by more than 1,000 students during the pandemic. We had a lot of students who came to us in kindergarten that did not previously have early childhood experiences. And then the percent vulnerable in communication skills and general knowledge. So hopefully as I've flipped through those maps, you've been able to keep your eye on sort of one section of town that holds some meaning for you. I'll walk you now through the National Neighborhood Equity Index. The darker the purple, the greater number of equity indicators in a neighborhood that suggests that this neighborhood is sort of at risk. You can see that there are only a few that are that really deep purple, but they're all pretty concentrated and very close to where we are right now. This next map shows us the percentage of students that were vulnerable in one or more domains on top of the National Neighborhood Equity Index, or the NNEI. Those areas that are darker red show that students are overall performing worse than we would have expected based on the NNEI data. Those areas that are blue and moving into darker blue, students are performing better than we would have expected based on the NNEI, and anything that's gray fits what we would anticipate. So some questions that we might ask is, what's happening in that dark red neighborhood? That seems off. There are very few risk indicators, and yet our children are having a higher percentage of vulnerability. We could also look at the light blue and say, well, what's going on there? There were some risk indicators, but overall children are performing better than we would have anticipated. Our job is not to look at the maps and make a judgment or have an answer. Our job is to take the maps out to people in the neighborhoods and talk to families and get the stories around the data. We also work with our community partners to layer on other data points, assets like healthcare facilities. Do we know where we have food deserts, transportation routes, safe parks where your children can actually play? Sidewalks, for example, access to things like the Discovery Center. What we learned throughout the wave one of this data is when we talked to families, we made some assumptions about what we thought the data meant, and they helped really clarify for us the challenges that they're facing as parents, and that they really don't want to be provided with transportation all around town. They want opportunities in their neighborhoods for things like Discovery Center, STEM nights, bookmobile, high-quality child care seats. They want to know that there's somewhere they can trust to leave their children. So what do we do with all this data? Because it's really nice that we can see it. I think for some of us, we probably think, yeah, we could have predicted a good deal of that. What do we do with it? And how do we turn it into real action at the neighborhood level? That's the work of the Ready to Learn team. In our wave one, we turned your $200,000 investment into $700,000 of grant awards. And we've been able to secure those. And we'll continue that work from 2023 to 2025. Do you want to come on up? And Emily will walk you through sort of what our next steps are, and I will pass out the basics books when I do that.
Lovely. Yes, so you can see that this year we were able to secure additional funding or continue our funding for the Ready to Learn early childhood work in the community. We're really excited to look into the next years of work in this area. We did, as we mentioned, this initial implementation of our 3-tier strategy for support and resources for family was stymied by COVID. It made it very difficult. We found all kinds of creative ways to do that. Partnership with UW Health, which you may have heard of, where we're doing, you just received the book that we've put together with our partners. That book goes out with a kit of other essential elements to every mother who has a baby at UW Health and their maternal ward, so we're doing that. And so finding different ways to kind of access and reach those families. We've had a couple of years to understand what we're doing well and where we need to grow, and so we are at a point now where our Ready to Learn team is coming back together to do strategic planning for our next 3 years of implementation in this community, taking a really close look at the EDI data and understanding where we need to focus our energy. The NNEI map is such a resource to us to help really see that additional layer of, you know, what are the challenges that are facing our community and different areas of our community, because we can do a push out of resources, but if we are going to be equitable and make sure that we are appropriately pushing out resources in a responsive way to our community, we now have an additional tool set to help us with that data or with that effort. So some of the things that we've been doing over the last few years, and we will continue doing, and then we are going to build from here, is our first here is the broad reach light touch. So this is just basically information campaign to the community about great ways to interact with your child. Just the information that I gave you at the beginning of this presentation. Why is it important for you to do certain things with your child before the age of 5? What does it mean to their life? What does it mean to their potential? What does it mean to their opportunities for the lifetime? And then what are those tools? How do we give those to our children? That's just basically an information campaign that we utilize all of our partners to help bring that information to families. That book is a great example. Everything in that book is created by our partners and compiled. So those logos that you see in the beginning of the book are the contributors to the book. We also have a preschool version. And so we're pushing this information out using the basics, which is what that book is. The beginning with Babbel app, which is an app that parents can download. It gives them little tips on what to do with their children. And then our tier 2 is direct contact with the families. So this is implementing parenting classes and opportunities to learn from each other and learn from a facilitator. We use Abriendo Puertas and Opening Doors. It's an English-Spanish program that's just basic developmental tips and resources. And then the Incredible Years, which is more behavioral-based, what to do, how to help your child through common difficulties and developmental issues that come up over the course of a child's life. And then our tier 3 is trying to wrap the resources around those families, because we can talk about the basics, we can talk about Babbel, we can talk about reading to your child, we can talk about all of these things that are great to do, but if your family is not feeling healthy, if you have those slides that we saw in the slide back, we have stress about finances, we have other issues that are pulling on the family, domestic violence and things. We need those resources to help lift that family up and give them a place where they can be safe and able to provide those resources to their children. This makes a big difference for everything that this school board does and that this school district does, because when our kids come into our district not ready and not able to take what we have to offer them, it's just a cycle that keeps on repeating. I think I just killed the screen. There we go. So what we're going to be doing, so we're kind of in our information campaign, as Heidi mentioned. We're going around the community. We're talking to people about the EDI. We have 2 purposes for that. We want to learn from you, and we want you to learn from us. We want organizations and institutions to understand what the tool is, how to find it, how to use it, because this kind of tool helps to plan services for all kinds of agencies and institutions in this community, and it's a very valuable tool. And we also want to learn back. You know, different people are interacting with this issue from different angles and different lenses in our community. When they look at something on the map, what do they see? What do we have to learn from them to understand what we need to know about implementing and being better at our Ready to Learn work? We also use the EDI data to evaluate the work that we've done. So again, we're looking at the old data, we're looking at the new data, and we're trying to plan strategically for the future of our work in this area so that we can grow and we can make real impact in this area in our community. And finally, we are working with Region 1 Planning Council to do a community study, which is going to drill into some of those questions that Heidi touched on in the like the NNEI map, for example, that looks at, those anomalies on the map, what's happening there. So their team, along with our leadership team, are going to be going out and doing focus groups, different surveys, using other data pieces to take a closer look at 8 to 10 questions like that we will glean, first of all, from our general gallery walks, talking to the community and seeing what their questions are, and also things that our leadership team have looked at and said, hey, what do you think is going on here? Are there green spaces in these areas that show high vulnerability, or what kind of resources are there or lacking? Those kind of questions are the things that we'll drill into with the Region 1 studies, so that we can have the result of a study that helps our community understand how to contextualize a lot of data and put it into practical action use, because data tools are wonderful, data is great, and if people don't use it, it's not helping anybody. So we're using it, our partners are using it, and our goal is to have the whole community aware of and using this data and helping our community to grow. Any questions? That's where we're headed next.
That's me, Mr. Rollins.
Well, one comment, but then I do actually have a question. The comment is, people still in this town think that there's a west side and an east side and maybe a south side and a north side, but you look at these maps and, these issues are community-wide issues. Right. They're all over. So if anything comes out of this process, I hope that people look at these maps and start understanding that. The question that I've got on the green maps, I don't know what else to call them, the green maps, there's this little sliver of the city that's gray on every single map. What does that mean?
It means that there were not enough children in that census tract to be measured, and so it's exempt.
How many children do you need?
10. Yeah. Specifically kindergartners.
In RPS?
Specifically in RPS, yes.
That's all at Churchill's Grove. You don't have 10 kindergartners from Churchill's Grove in RPS.
We've dug into this. They didn't for this survey. We had the same question, and we went back to UCLA and said, double check, triple check, and that's what they have.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Siegel?
Thank you. Were the charter schools included in the surveys?
We reached out to the charter schools to include them, but they were not interested at this time. I would really love to include them in Wave 3 when we do this again, and also have a broader reach into our private and parochials. We did offer it to, Esther was pounding the pavement, trying to get schools on board. And I'm hopeful that with another wave and more community conversation, we'll be able to really saturate all of our schools and get more of a true census across our city and county.
And do I recall once upon a time there was a effort to include the parochial schools?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that turn out?
Same. We went to all the parochial schools. I sat down and had conversations with them, and they had the option. And at this time, it was a hard year because a lot of schools are having a lot of staffing issues, and it is very intensive, even if you only have a few kindergarten classes, to take the time and fill out a 103 question survey for every single student. It requires a little pedaling, and so we will keep working on this to bring in more.
And cost. Mm-hmm. The Erickson Foundation sort of supplemented that in the first wave through their funders, not the RPS board. And in this wave, schools needed to pay for their own.
All right, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I guess just to emphasize Mr. Rollins' point, on that NNEI map, you have that little yellow arrow pointing to a deep red shape. I don't know what
Well, I'd love to.
slide it's on. I think it's a couple more down.
Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting, and that is my neighborhood. And when I think of my neighborhood, I think of not kindergartners. I think of a demographic that is, you know, like long retired. And it's really interesting to contemplate how we could have that concentration of students who are exhibiting those vulnerabilities and risks in a neighborhood that just from an aerial view looks just as stable as could possibly be. So this is really fascinating information, and certainly not what I expected when this got started 4 years ago. So thank you.
Ms. Pearson?
So just for clarity, in the gray area, it was a number of response to the surveys, or actually the number of
The number of
kids.
children. So anything under 10 makes things personally identifiable, and so they're eliminated from the study. There's two reasons why we might have fewer than 10 kindergartners reported. One is just enrollment, and perhaps there are more kindergarten age students attending private schools that were not included. That's one explanation. Another is parents do have the opportunity to opt out. So if there were, say, 13 or 14 kindergarten students in this area and 3 to 4 of them opted out, then that would bring our number down below 10. We did not have a lot of parents who opted out district-wide, only a handful, but they are allowed to do that.
Thank you.
Ms. McCullough?
So the area that Mr. Siegel pointed out, the red, so it wasn't expected.
That's right. Based on their NNEI, you would sort of anticipate average outcomes. And in this area, students demonstrated more vulnerability than you would have expected.
And this is all done by address where they live, correct? Because that's where Montessori is.
Correct. It's address where they live, not where they attend school.
Yeah. Thank you.
That is the case, but since we work on school zones, you can pretty well guess that that neighborhood, maybe not so much with Montessori being a special program, but Bloom and Johnson, of course, are right in there. So it is interesting to see that concentration of vulnerabilities and risks at those schools.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Thank you for your sustained attention and your engagement. I really appreciate it at the end of a long night. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Our final item tonight is a preview of consent agenda for February 14th and 28th. Are there any items the board members would like to discuss?
At the risk of being shot for asking a question. And we could wait this till next week because we're going to vote, but there's a recurrence, or it's back, the vote on accepting some outside donations that have ongoing maintenance costs in the district. And I think if Mr. Phillips can just speak quickly to whatever, who gets to speak to that? Mr. Gallagher, because you did a survey, I looked at you because you did a survey of the entire district and what we had ongoing costs that we had inherited. And so these.
I think I can jump in. We shared that in the board update, the overall analysis of existing projects that we have to make sure we maintain, and two, Mr. Gallagher and the schools team conferred with every principal in the district with the support of Mr. Phillips to ensure that we added some choice, in addition to the data collection, that we added some key questions to guide us towards that that you can see in the executive summary here.
Okay. I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention since it came back when we sort of sent it away until that was covered. And then the other piece is for Mr. Brown, and that is who is the auditing service with? I know I can just pull this up, but I thought you might be quicker because it was at blank, a day ago. So we must have decided on somebody. Okay, yeah, because it's still blank. Right. Okay. All right, just wanted to make sure we had somebody since the executive summary was blank. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Siegel?
I guess sort of the same thing on 9.0, the RFP for substitute management. What exactly is that?
It will not be coming forward until the last meeting of the month.
I see. Sorry.
Yeah. But what we're looking at doing, Mr. Zedeker is in the process of doing a board write-up, but we are probably going to be bifurcating our substitute service proposal. One part of that bifurcation will be probably consideration of bringing in-house the care and service of our retired substitute teachers, the RPS retirees, and then potentially using the expertise of an outside entity through this RFP process to recruit non-retirees is where the latest thinking is. Mr. Zedeker, anything you'd like to add to that?
No.
Thank you, David. I did send them a note about that, and then I forgot to ask about that one.
No other questions? That concludes our report.
All right, thank you. So as promised, governance does not have anything other than our preview of consent, and the one on that is the new teacher hiring incentives, if anybody has any question about that. Okay. Seeing none, we're at the petitions and communication, and we don't have anybody to speak. So, does anybody have anything they need to add to the agenda or any other recommendations? If not, I'll entertain a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Same sign. We are adjourned at 8:48 p.m. Thank you, everyone.